Okay, I will pour myself a drink before I start, as usual. And we're not off to a very good start because already we've got the stupid orange light, which probably means that this stream isn't going to work and no one's going to be able to hear a word I say. So if I find out that the audio isn't working, I'm just going to scrap this and try it again another time. Because I ain't got the patience for it today. I ain't got the patience for shoddy technology. So yeah, let me just finish this. 1 second. So if anybody's watching already, I don't know if anybody is yet. Let me know how the audio sounds. Does it sound all choppy? Like, is it doing that thing it did last time where I'm like, does it sound like that? Because if it does, I'm not doing this. I'm telling you right now. How's it going, Owen? Audio is good. Awesome. Glad to hear it. Again, it's got that little orange ring of death, which reminds me of the original Xbox. You know, you know how the original Xbox, when there was something wrong with it, the little green light would turn orange, and it usually meant like there was a fault within the machine. That's what's happening here with my microphone. It's turning orange and it's scaring the life out of me because I don't want to spend 2 hours like waffling on and nobody can understand me because of the audio, because that was why I unlisted my previous stream, for that very reason. It's a bloody nightmare, man. But yeah, if the audio is good this time, that's great news, mate. And yeah, God bless you, man, every time. What's up, Gareth? Yes, Nordic. How are you? Boxing is shit. ATM. Should we talk about Charlie Kirk? Oh, we're going to be talking about Charlie Kirk. We've got a lot to say about that dude. Got a lot to say about him. We've got a lot to say in this stream, by the way. And I'll get to the comments in a moment. But since I think there's a few people watching now, disclaimer time. This stream is not going to be for the faint of heart. It's not going to be for people who are easily offended. It's not going to be for people who are bigoted. And it's not going to be for people who basically take the liberal approach to things and just assume that everybody agrees with them. Because you see, that's what leftists do, right? Leftists always assume, and that's why leftists don't understand the concept of consequences, right? Because they always assume that everybody automatically agrees with them no matter what. And whenever anybody doesn't agree, it's like a glitch in the matrix, and they start spazzing out and going crazy. And yeah, that's why we have so much violence directed at us. But so yeah, this stream, it's going to be a political stream. I'm not going to be talking much about boxing. You guys can ask me about boxing if you want, but the answers are going to be very brief and to the point. So yeah, if there's any, like, I don't know, Canelo fans or whatever that are looking for some sort of snappy remark from me or something like that, you're not going to get that. I could care less about boxing right now. It's not. Speaking of, I was actually sparring yesterday. I've got a scratch on my nose. So yeah, but so I'm still training, but like I'm not interested at all in like covering boxing. You know, there's plenty of AI channels that will do that for you. You know, that the AI channels have basically invalidated any actual human content that the internet has to offer in regards to boxing. So a lot of my, at least in the state of mind I'm in right now, a lot of the content that's going to be on this channel, for as long as this channel lasts, is going to be political. It's going to be philosophical. It's going to be theological. It's going to be all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, I'm already losing my train of thought. I had a lot of things I wanted to disclaim at the start of this stream, just to clear up any confusion, so that if anybody asks me, I could revert them to the early part of the stream. But yeah, obviously that hasn't worked out, has it? But yeah, basically, I feel as if half of my audience is kind of pissed off at me right now, and the other half are pissed off at me for completely separate reasons. It's like you can't really win. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So it's like half of my audience right now, because I lost about nearly 20 subscribers just based on a community post. Half of my audience are pissed off at the fact that I don't unambiguously hate every single Jewish person on the planet. And it's interesting to me because, like I was talking about a couple of minutes ago, about how liberals always assume everybody agrees with them on everything. I don't recall, I don't recall ever in the history of my existence on the internet, going back to this channel and before, back to the days when I used to go on forums and stuff like that, I don't recall ever stating that I hate every single Jew. I don't recall ever stating that I hate Jewish people. I don't recall that ever being a thing. I don't recall that ever being a narrative about me. I don't recall that ever being my identity. But it seems like a large percentage of my audience seem to think that I want to exterminate the Jewish race. I don't know where that came from. I don't know why people just assumed that, but that seemed to be the thing. Now, have I criticized Jews on this channel? Absolutely. I've criticized Jews many times on this channel, and it's one of the things that I've complained about in regards to this channel, because when you do criticize Jews, and not necessarily just Jews. I know that Jews is a very, very vague term, because I don't mean every single Jewish person on the planet. When I say Jews, I'm generally talking about specific factions of Jews. So, and they can definitely be criticized, right? If you look at, for example, the ADL, um, APAC, of course, the State of Israel, and the various factions within it. There's a lot of room for criticism. I'm trying to word this carefully, right? I feel as if Jews, one of the biggest problems with that community that I have, is that they have far too much influence over American politics. And let's be honest, where America goes, the rest of the world follows. Okay, America is essentially the bastion of Western civilization. And I feel as if factions and organizations like APAC and the ADL have far too much influence over specific American political factions. There's obviously the two party system, right? Um, Democrats and Republicans. All the top Democrats and Republican MPs are all backed by APAC and the ADL, right? So they have far too much influence. And a lot of the anti whiteism was, of course, perpetuated by them. I've talked about that many times on here. They also have a huge influence over Hollywood. Okay, Hollywood, as we all know, I mean, this has been common knowledge for generations, since the 1950s or even before. Hollywood has been run by Jews, essentially. It always has been. And I feel as if a lot of the propaganda we see in movies and in the entertainment industry, as well as the music industry and pornography, right? Pornography is that entire industry is run by certain Jewish factions, right? So there's a lot you can criticize the Jews for. And I hate how, when you talk about these things openly and you try to highlight these things, you get banned, you get censored, you get shadow banned, you get silenced, right? They have a lot of political power. Now, at the same time, they don't have as much power as you think they do in Europe. Now, my country, for example, the UK, Jews have very little power, if at all. For example, the Labour Party, which currently rules the UK, right? That's the ruling political faction at the moment. The Labour Party, and it's surprising to me that a lot of people outside of the UK don't seem to realise this, because all you'd have to do is just a little bit of research on British politics to know that the Labour Party is absolutely vehemently opposed to the state of Israel. Okay, that's very, very well known. Okay, I'm surprised a lot of people in America who are quite politically aware don't realize that. The Tory party are a little bit more in favor of Israel, and they're a little bit more in favor of interfering in the Middle East, for example. But the Labour Party in general has always, to my knowledge, been opposed to the state of Israel, which is why they often get accused of anti-Semitism, which is a word I hate, by the way. Anti-Semitism is just a buzzword. It's no different to calling someone a fascist. It's dumb. It's daft. Okay, it's a word I don't use. But yeah, a lot of people don't realize that the Labour Party is vehemently against Israel. Not only that, but if you look at the Jewish community in the UK, now I know several Jews. I've gone out, I've spoken to them, and I've been speaking to a lot of people who are quite politically aware in my personal life, and I've been getting involved in politics quite a bit outside of YouTube, right? Because that's something that I want to I basically want to bring people around to our way of thinking, but do so organically, do so in person, do so through business and things like that, through debate and discussion and things of that nature, rather than just bitching and moaning and complaining on the internet, right? I'm trying to put that part of my life behind me, essentially. But what you'll notice about the Jewish community in the UK is just how fractured that whole community is. Like, people seem to have this idea in their heads. And this is another thing I wasn't sure whether to bring up, but I will anyway, because it started to concern me a little bit. I've started to wonder, are a vast or quite a large percentage of my audience Muslims? I'm starting to wonder if they are, because again, the hatred for the Jewish community that I see in my comment section sometimes and that I see on the reactionary right often comes from people who don't show their face, who don't use their real name. And they seem to be a little bit too whimsical in their ideas of how things are in the Middle East or how things ought to be in that region. I'll talk about that a little bit as more people join and whatnot, because I think that is quite interesting, and it's quite concerning to me as well, because there's a couple of comments I'll highlight, a couple of comments that I had on some of my community posts as well as some of my videos, which really made me ponder that question. It really did. So yeah, got a lot to talk about here. It's going to be a very political stream, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of people giving their 2 cents. But let me stop rambling and go through some comments, because I don't want to get like far behind in the comment section. All right, 1 second. They were right. You calling you a fascist, predicting Fury to be Usyk is fascism. Yeah, the audio is perfect. Glad to hear it, man. Glad to hear it. God bless you. Great video last week about Trump, the obsession with Trump. I actually have a theory that most autistic people, most people who have Trump derangement syndrome are autistic. That doesn't surprise me at all. I've actually long suspected that. And again, when you're autistic and you have a particular autistic obsession, it's very difficult to let go of it. And it's very difficult to not have intrusive thoughts that make you lose your mind, essentially. And you can definitely see that with those groups of people. I'm shocked to hear this left-wing woman who are pro-abortion were disgusted about what happened to Charlie and the reaction. Yeah, I've noticed that. And again, that's why I call it a Christian revival, because that's generally how God works. And again, I know some people might cringe at me calling Charlie Kirk a Christian martyr. And look, we're gonna at some point in this stream, we're gonna talk about the theory that he's not even dead, but we'll get to that. But yeah, some people cringe at me calling Charlie Kirk a Christian martyr, but the whole point of martyrdom is that when a Christian dies for his beliefs, it causes shockwaves across the world, where so many people feel the call. They feel the call of God, and they become born again. And that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm witnessing all across social media. I'm witnessing it in person. Again, I'm going out and talking to people. I'm working all over the country. I've had conversations, like really in-depth conversations with people in person about Charlie Kirk. Even people who didn't really think much of him before are, buying their first Bible, buying their first suit, going to church for the first time. It seems to me like a classic biblical, but a modern day biblical Christian revival. That's what it seems like to me. And sometimes you just got to have a leap of faith with things like that. And yeah, I definitely do. But on the subject of, again, leftism and stuff like that, what I was talking about earlier, I kind of lost my train of thought. The Jewish community in the UK, and again, I pointed out how Jews in the UK do not have anywhere near as much political power as what they have in America, right? It's not even close. You don't have organizations like AIPAC and the ADL over here in the UK. They don't have any influence at all over British media. They don't have any influence at all, to my knowledge, over British politics. And even the entertainment industry in Britain, they don't have they don't have their feet under the table at all. But see, when you talk to Jews in the UK, you'll be surprised by how political they are, despite not having a lot of influence or power. And I've noticed that the vast majority of Jews that I've met or have come across in the UK are lefties, right? A lot of them, in fact, here's what might surprise a lot of Americans. A lot of Jews in the UK are pro-Palestine. I've seen Jews literally out there marching in support of Hamas. You would not. I mean, I know that sounds absolutely insane because Hamas, who are based in Gaza, who are the political party that rules that region, have what, 40 hostages or something like that that they're still refusing to release. You know, they've massacred like untold numbers of Jews. You know, there was of course that October 7th attack, which was just, you know, one of the most prolific terrorist attacks of our time. Right, it was probably what the Jews would consider 9/11 to them, because they're a very small country over in Israel. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the conspiracies involving that, but I'll get to that all in good time. But my point is, you would be surprised how many Jews in the UK are openly in support of Gaza, in support of Palestine, and in support of Hamas. You would not believe it. You actually see them at some of these rallies. Like, go and watch Charlie Veitch's coverage of the Liverpool rally protesting against the digital ID. So for those of you who don't know, right now, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in the UK are trying to introduce a digital ID, which is kind of what they have in China under the communist regime, right? So essentially, the Labour Party is slowly but surely introducing communism into this country. And there were thousands and thousands of people who showed up in Liverpool to protest it, right? Charlie Veitch was covering it on his camera, right? Basically, what happened was you had the Palestine protesters, because you see, the thing about the pro-Palestine protesters, a lot of them are government renter crowds, right? A lot of them are agent provocateurs, and they show up to every single event, even if it has nothing to do with Palestine, even if it has nothing to do with terrorism, has nothing to do with Israel. They will literally show up and they will protest just so that they can get attention and divert attention from whatever the communist regime are up to, basically, right? So they were there. And there was also a group of Jews, right, British Jews, who were there openly in support of Hamas, right? And Charlie Veitch was basically taking the piss out of them, and they didn't like being filmed, right? But you'll find that that's very, very common among the Jewish community in the UK. Now, don't get me wrong, there are right-wing Jews. There are Jews that support conservative family values and stuff like that. But I found that they tend to be in the minority. But it's crazy to me how people on the reactionary right, I know I'm kind of rambling a bit here, but you know, you would consider me reactionary right? You would consider a lot of the people that I react with on here and that I affiliate with, you consider us reactionary right? Reactionary conservatives. Okay. You would be surprised how many people on our side openly support Islamic terrorism and openly despise Israel. Like, I can't get my head around it. And again, I don't know why me as a born again Christian, because I'm not just a reactionary conservative. Okay, I'm coming at it from a born again Christian perspective. That's my ideology. That's my worldview. That's my belief. Okay, I believe it wholeheartedly. Okay, I read the King James Bible. I study Christian theology. I know what I'm talking about. Okay. So why would anybody, and it makes me wonder if my audience a lot of the time even listen to anything I've ever said to make these assumptions about me. Why would anybody assume that I am absolutely 100% opposed to the state of Israel and wants to see it wiped out and would align myself with Muslims to achieve that goal? Why would anybody think that? I mean, to just ignore Islam, like to see Israel, and again, I'll criticize Israel. There've been a lot of atrocities committed by some of the factions within Israel, right? But to look at Israel and to see them as the devil, right? They're the devil figure of the reactionary right at the moment, right? So to look at Israel and see them as our absolute enemies, like that they are just the absolute opposite of us, and then side with Islam, completely forgetting what Islam is, where it comes from, the history of Islam, how it has openly attempted to violently subjugate my people throughout the age. Ever since Islam's inception, right, from the very inception of Islam, it was designed to subjugate my people, okay, to invade our nations, to rape and pillage and torture and murder our people, and replace it with a contrived, demonic, pagan, false interpretation of our scriptures, right? It's literally a religion that was founded by a pagan, right? A 7th century Arabian caravan robber and warlord who aligned himself with pagans, who received supposedly a revelation from the angel Gabriel, but There's a lot of evidence to suggest it wasn't such. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that it was Baal who he was who he was revealed to. Either that or he just made the whole thing up. Kind of like Joseph Smith. I guess you could draw a parallel there between Islam and Mormonism, right? It's essentially just a corruption of our gospel, a satanic corruption of our sacred scriptures, right? To actually align with those people, because I'm sick of seeing comments. Oh, but what about Gaza? What about the children? Again, I'm talking about Charlie Kirk being murdered by some gay retard, and everybody, people on the reactionary right. I've noticed they do one of two things in reaction to that situation. They say, "Oh well, Charlie was a Zio shill, so who cares?" Or they say, "Oh, but what about the children in Gaza? What about the people in Gaza who are being shelled?" Yeah, the people of Gaza. You're talking about Orthodox Muslims. And I might get banned for saying this. I don't care. You're talking about Orthodox Muslims. You're talking about people who, in their very worldview, their very scripture, compels them to curse us in their hearts. Okay, there's a very popular passage from the Quran. I don't have it in front of me, but it states, "We smile at them," and it's talking about us, Jews and Christians, right? It's saying we smile at them with our faces, but we curse them in our hearts. Okay, that's literally in their scriptures, and it refers to what's called offensive jihad. Okay, the idea that they are compelled to violently subjugate our people. Okay, it's not Jews who are invading our countries and flooding our communities with crime and raping our daughters, is it? It's not Jews that's doing that. No, it's it's their ideological opposition that's doing it. So you expect me, as a born again, Bible believing Christian, to feel sorry for the people of Gaza, which I do to an extent, because as a Christian, we are called to love our enemies. Okay. But you want me to empathize with those people in that region who literally, if they had it their way, would violently subjugate my people. They would march upon my country and behead every single one of the men in this country, rape all our women, and force us to pay the jizya, right? They would subjugate us. They would subjugate us. Of course they would. I mean, to say that they wouldn't is insanity, and it makes me wonder if a lot of these people in the reactionary right are actually Islamic Trojans. Essentially, I'm wondering if a lot of these guys in my comment section who don't show their face, they don't use their real name, and they talk about the tunnelers. Like, again, you've seen all my live streams, right? You've seen just like swarms of comments saying the tribes, the tiny hats, the tunnelers, the Jews, the Jays. Like, you see all these comments, and it's all these fake accounts. I'm wondering if these guys are literally Pakistani Muslim provocateurs. That's what I'm starting to wonder, because it's really, really disturbing to me that I make one community post just telling you guys, and I don't even support Israel. Okay, I've criticized Israel. Again, I've criticized the ADL, I've criticized APAC, I've criticized a lot of Jewish factions over the years, and I'll continue to do so at the risk of being banned, because they control a large portion of social media. So at the risk of getting in trouble, I'll continue to speak out, right? But when I make one post clarifying to my audience that I do not hate every single Jew, that I don't despise the Jewish race, and I've never said that I have, or that I never said that I do, I lose 20 subscribers and have people calling me a Jew and saying "show your nose" and all that stupid. Like, I actually had comments saying that, and I'm having comments telling me, "Oh, but Christians and Muslims in the West Bank live in harmony with each other." That's not theologically possible. It's not theologically possible for us to live in harmony with people who want to subjugate us, who want to violently subjugate my entire people. You want me to prioritize people whose very whose very worldview comes from a corruption of my sacred gospel. You you want me to prioritize those people against the Jews, right? I mean, I would probably see eye to eye with a Jew a lot more than I would, a Pakistani Muslim who, is on here talking about blowing people up and all that. You go on a bus in my country and there's Somalians sitting at the front of the bus talking about how much they want to blow up the Jews and all that. I'm supposed to side with those people. Are you kidding me? Again, it tells me that a lot of people on the reactionary right are either incredibly stupid and incredibly brainwashed, or they are literally trying to reverse radicalize someone like me to hate somebody who should be my ally. And again, I'm not even saying I view Israel as an ally. I think some of the factions in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu and his party, have committed some atrocities. And there's a lot of people within that very small country who believe so. Also, I've read a great deal, and again, I've been reading a lot of books lately. I've read a great deal about the founding of Israel, about their war of independence, the diaspora, and their battles with the British, and their battles with the people of Palestine, the people of Jordan, the people of Syria. The kind of strange alliance that they had with the Soviet Union. And this is another thing. It's interesting to me. I've been talking about communism quite a bit lately. It's interesting to me how the people who complain about Israel and see the Jews as our enemy and talk about Jews basically infiltrating the infrastructures of the West. It's interesting how these people just conveniently forget about communism. They just conveniently forget about the Soviet Union, which was a dying empire. And since the Soviet Union didn't have any innovation, because let's be honest, communism is garbage and it destroys any empire from within. When the Soviet Union was dying, there's a good documentary about this, which I'll try to find. They sent numerous agents to infiltrate America's society, right? Or parts of America's infrastructure. So they infiltrated the media, they infiltrated the government, they infiltrated the church, they infiltrated the school system, and they infiltrated certain aspects of the mainstream media, of the entertainment industry, right? So the Soviet Union, or the remnants of the dying Soviet Union, and communist China both have numerous, and I mean numerous, spies all throughout America, right, messing around and causing confusion. So it's interesting to me how this idea, and I'm not saying there weren't communists in Israel, there actually are, believe it or not, communists from the nation of Israel. When the nation of Israel, before it became independent, there were certain parties who were opposed to the far right ruling party of Israel, and I forget the name of the people that were in charge. I did read about it, but there was at least one communist party, and they had an uneasy alliance with the Soviet Union. Basically, the Soviet Union was aligned with Syria, who was absolute war with Israel. So even the communists within Israel had to basically be very, very careful with how they dealt with the Soviet Union, right? But it's interesting to me how people just ignore the Soviet Union like it never existed. They ignore China like it doesn't exist. And they direct all their hatred. They ignore Islam, like I said before. They completely ignore the fact that you have a registered terrorist organization running Gaza. Okay, that they are the political faction that rule that land and are voted in by the people. Okay, the people of Gaza, Orthodox Muslims, openly support Hamas. Okay, there's even Jews in the UK who openly support Hamas. Okay, the Labour Party in the UK openly supports Hamas. All right. And you want me to think Jews are the problem? You want me to, like, given all that information, you can rewind it if you want, and you can do your own research. And I advise you guys to read all of the history of that region you can, right? And make up your own mind. To want me to basically direct all my anger and all my hatred towards Jews and towards the state of Israel as if it's a monolithic devil figure in politics is extremely naive, and it's extremely immature. And I feel as if people who have a black and white way of thinking, and you might remember when I criticized Israel when I did my Jordan Peterson video a few years ago, right? I talked about how he conveniently stopped talking about that region, or kind of changed his opinion on it when he joined the Daily Wire, right? So I'm not saying that Israel itself doesn't have any influence over sort of reactionary politics. Okay, in mainstream conservatism in America, absolutely they do. Okay, absolutely, but it's kind of besides the point, isn't it? So I know I've been ranting like crazy, but Let me try and find my place in the comments because that little rant I just went on has caused me to lose my place. So one boxing question that you got Inoue versus Nakatani. Probably Inoue on points. Nakatani might actually be more technically gifted, but Inoue is a much better athlete and a bigger puncher. So yeah. What are your reactions to Charlie's wife Erica Kirk's speech at the funeral and her behavior in recent days? Well, I mean, it's a grieving widow, so you can't really apply much logic to how a grieving widow behaves in the aftermath of her husband's death because again, it's like everybody processes guilt and processes grief differently, don't they? And as far as the speech itself, she was basically just being a Christian. She said she forgave the guy, that she's going to continue Charlie's memory. A lot of people are saying it was pretentious and fake. Look, you can believe that if you want. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, 20 subs to a left wing audience. Yeah. Well, they consider themselves right wing, but I consider they are provocateurs within the reactionary right. I strongly suspect they may have been Muslims. I know that some Muslims do watch my channel, and I've always been honest about my views on Islam. I'm never going to lie about that. So yeah. All right, where was I? I love the Jews. They gave me a good Chinese. Yeah, yeah. But most of the Jews don't even know what their people are doing. But again, what when people say the Jews, what exactly do they mean? It's far too vague. All right. If I was to generalize an entire group of people, I would try to make it very clear who I'm talking about. So, like when you say the Jews, are you talking about Benjamin Netanyahu and his right wing party? Are you talking about APAC? Are you talking about the ADL? Are you talking about Rabbi Shmuley? Like, who do you mean when you say the Jews? This is the point I'm trying to make. And I've tried to allude to this, but in a very, very nice way so as to not alienate my audience. But it's gotten to the point where I don't even care about alienating my audience because a lot of them just aren't really interested in dialogue or speaking the truth or providing any solutions. They just want to complain about the Jews. They just want to blame all their problems on the Jews. And again, that's a very, very Muslim way of thinking. You know, the only top guys I'm interested in are Usyk and Inoue. Well, they're £1 and £2 for pound objectively. Objectively, there's no doubt about that. It's the same as what liberals do all the time, blame white people or whatever. Well, again, technically that's true. But the problem with blaming the Jews for everything is, again, it's far too vague. Like I'm saying, it's far too vague. It really depends on the faction you're talking about, doesn't it? And again, you can rewind this if you want and listen very carefully to what I was saying. But when you've got factions like Islam, right? You've got Hamas, a officially registered terrorist organization, the most brutal and most violent and most genuine death cult we've seen in modern history, right? You have remnants of the Soviet Union who have spies and infiltrators in every single aspect of America's infrastructure, as well as communist China, which is still very much a superpower right now. Okay, China have got secret police headquarters in my home city. I don't know if you know about that, but they do. But it's interesting how people on the reactionary right just completely ignore all this and blame everything on the Jews. They completely ignore all this and they blame everything on the state of Israel, which is, again, the state of Israel is one of the smallest and yet one of the most divided countries in the world. Okay, it's one of the most fractured nations in the world. Like, there's very little unity there. Okay, and again, the Jewish community worldwide, you would be surprised to learn, is not in support of Israel. Okay, again, you would be hard pressed to find a Jew in Britain who actually supports the state of Israel. Like you'd be hard pressed to find it. So again, I just don't think it lets me know that the people who are talking about the Jews and blaming all their problems on them, either they're very, very stupid and they're just way too reactionary, or they're some sort of Muslim infiltrator. That's all I can say about that. Sorry guys, I'm just responding to a text from my boss. One sec. Shifts for this week. Cheers. Oh. The job's getting to me, man. They just text me out of the blue and offer me shifts, and have to respond as quickly as possible, or they give them to someone else. That's what it's like, you know. Yeah. Oh, there we are. Bloody Weatherspoons. Yeah, they even scapegoat whites for Jewish crimes, but Jews don't even care if you insult them now. Yeah, yeah, definitely. A lot of it is also European communism as well, mostly from Germany and Russia. They've spread tons of communism in Western Europe and America in the 1900s. Yeah, and again, like I don't know if you were listening earlier, but when the Soviet Union, which was an empire, let's be honest, was in its dying days, they realized that they couldn't take over the West. They couldn't take over America. They couldn't even keep a hold of their own empire. It was dying because there's no innovation in communist countries. Okay, communism doesn't breed competition. It doesn't breed innovation. Okay, it's there's no basically it's that there's no capitalism, obviously, right? So the ruling class sits on everybody's wealth, but the people don't contribute anything to society. So it was doomed to fail. I mean, Stalin and Lenin basically gaslit their entire empire to forsake God, and to forsake their own entrepreneurial spirit and things of that nature, and basically starved more than half of the population to death. So it was a dying empire from the very beginning. It's satanic. I will openly say, from a Christian perspective, communism is satanic. It's the logical and most extreme result of atheism. That's essentially what communism is, right? But what they did was they sent numerous spies into America, and it's unclear what they were able to do over here, but they sent them over to America and they infiltrated the top aspects of America's infrastructure. Again, church, government, the mainstream media, school system, and entertainment industry, right? And the remnants of that communist indoctrination is still seen today. You go to any college campus anywhere in the West, and there's literally people who have grown up in a free market and enjoy the standard of living that no communist in the entire world has ever enjoyed. And they're out there openly advocating communism. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that terrifying. I find that terrifying that a generation of, well-educated young college kids are advocating for a communist future for my country and for the West in general. When you look at any communist country, you look at South America, right? So you have Cuba, Venezuela, places like that. And of course, you look at how people lived in the days of the Soviet Union and how people still live in the aftermath of that mess, of that destruction. You look at how people live in China, for example. How can you look at that? How can you look at the poverty and the self-hatred that goes on in those nations, the absolute misery, like life in those countries, life in any country touched by communism, every single day is misery. It's just a suicidal worldview. It's a suicidal empire. Okay, how you can look at that as a Westerner who has grown up with all the luxuries of living in the West and think, I want my country to be like that. I want my country to become like the Soviet Union. I want my country to become like Cuba. I want my country to become like Venezuela. I don't know about you guys. That honestly terrifies me. And communism, it's one of them things that needs to be dissected, it needs to be studied, and it needs to be purged. Like communism cannot exist. Like it's one of them things, it literally needs to be stomped out of existence. It's horrible. And it's a lot more of a problem and it's a lot more of a threat to our people than Israel and the Jews. I can tell you that, okay? Again, I'm not saying that there aren't communists in Israel. There are. I'm not saying that there isn't negative aspects of the state of Israel, or that they haven't committed some atrocities or gone too far in certain areas, or that they haven't infiltrated certain aspects of America's infrastructure. I'm not saying that, but compared to communism, they're not. They're nothing. They're nothing to worry about. Oh, it's the best audio in months. Oh, that's good, man. I'm glad to hear it. I tell you, if an audience was Muslim, yeah, imagine that half of my audience is like Muslim all this time. But it wouldn't surprise me with some of the comments I've seen telling me to show my nose and talking about the West Bank and living in harmony and so. Come on, man. seeing that you've started book reviews, one I can recommend is a biography called Berserk: Shocking Life and Death of Edwin Valero, or a short book about Edwin Valero. I'd definitely check that out. I didn't know there was one. Shall I show you what I'm reading at the moment? Let me fix this camera, one sec. Reading that. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I'm nearly finished it. Just got a few pages. But that book, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, in my opinion, that should be mandatory reading in schools. I don't know why it isn't. See, because when I was in school and we did religious studies, we did read C.S. Lewis, but we read Narnia, right? So it was some of his earlier works, his fantasy works, and the allegories that were made to the Bible. I don't understand why Mere Christianity, as well as this book, I've got another C.S. Lewis book here, which I haven't read yet, but this one, Miracles. I don't know why that isn't mandatory reading for primary schools, because it's not only does it talk about Christian theology, but one of the things that you get from the first chapter of Mere Christianity, and it's in the it's the first chapter, the way that book starts, and I am going to review it eventually, so I'm going to kind of structure my thoughts on it a little bit better. But basically, it tries to get you to think for yourself, and before it gets into talking about Christian theology, C.S. Lewis talks about basically the nature of right and wrong, good and evil, common misconceptions about those terms, and he tries to get you to think about what those meanings actually mean from a secular perspective, and how from a secular perspective, and this is something I've been talking about for years, but from a secular perspective, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to even conceive of the idea of good or evil, or bad or right or wrong. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's something that he tried to talk about. He also talks about sexual morality and marriage from a Christian perspective. He also talks about the meaning of certain words. I've talked about the whole buzzword epidemic, how words get taken out of context and rendered meaningless. C.S. Lewis talked about that back in the 1940s. So very, very interesting book. I would totally recommend it. And again, I think it should be mandatory reading. And also, it would have, see, if I'd read that book before, it would have saved me a lot of time over the years and a lot of headaches, because when I talk to atheists, and I try to get these people to think for themselves, and I try to get them to see things from my perspective and at least have a bit of self-awareness, I could have just said to these guys, have you read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis? And if the answer was no, I would just say, well, go and read it. Go and read it, then come back to me. And you'll realize that that question that you just asked is the dumbest question ever, Yeah, shout out Apology. How's it going, man? Yeah, we also should address the issue of parents knowing there is something wrong with their kid but refusing to get them evaluated. I've noticed that. Yeah. That gay boy who shot Charlie Kirk is a good example of that. His parents knew he was a liberal. They knew he was a sodomite. They knew he was into anime porn. I'm not making this up, by the way. Go look it up. The dude had anime porn on his computer. They knew he was into all that sort of stuff. They knew he was using pronouns and all that stuff. And they knew he was watching leftist influencers, and they allowed it to happen. And they continued to validate his delusion. And they still his mother still continues to validate that. So yeah, I don't really like Kirk's support of the LGBT guys, but he was closer to God than most leftists will ever be. Well, you see, that's the thing. I wouldn't necessarily say that Kirk, at the time of his death, was in support of that stuff. It's just that he had a way of getting through to people and meeting them where they are, not where he wanted them to be, which is the saying, right? He was able to communicate with these people. He was able to empathize with them, and he was able to preach to them, speak to them about politics, obviously, speak to them from a secular point of view, but he was also able to preach the gospel and evangelize to them, to the point where, again, I talk about getting, like, how C.S. Lewis in his writings was able to get people to think for themselves and to challenge their own preconceptions. I feel like that's kind of what Charlie Kirk did with a lot of liberals. And you can say the same for a lot of gay people who knew Charlie Kirk. A lot of them were moved by him. A lot of them probably read the gospel for the first time in their life because of Charlie Kirk. So Look, you can criticize Charlie Kirk for a lot of things. You can say he's not as based as myself. He's not as radical in his right wing views as us. But at the end of the day, he was a lot more influential than any of us. I'm not out there on college campuses, debating with kids and getting them to come round. You're not doing that either. None of us are. But Charlie Kirk was able to do it. He was able to put himself in the lion's den. He was able to go to Oxford University and take on a whole congregation of intellectuals and tear them apart. He was able to do that, and I wouldn't be able to do that. So, look, we can criticize Charlie for a lot of things. We can criticize him all we want, but at the end of the day, we were not out there in the trenches bringing people to Christ the way he was. Again, Nordic, lots of people online are reporting more people in churches. Yeah, they are, and I've noticed it as well. I spoke to some street pastors last week while I was working, and because again, I work, as you know, nightclubs and pubs and whatnot, and I've spoke to several people in security. I've spoke to some people who own businesses and all that, and I've had conversations, and I've tried to do my bit to try to preach the gospel to them and to get them to think a little bit more critically about politics and stuff like that. In fact, recently I accepted a job at a university, and I spoke to some economic students. I talked a bit of politics with them. I asked them about Thomas Sowell and stuff like the kind of thing that Charlie used to do. And again, I got the same kind of ignorant response. Like I've never studied economics in my life yet. I seem to know a little bit more about it than some of them. It was quite interesting. But yeah, I've spoke to a lot of people. Again, I spoke to street pastors. I've spoke to business owners. And a lot of people right now are becoming red pill. They're kind of in the stage now that we were 10 years ago, kind of thing. And a lot of it is because of what happened to Charlie Kirk. It's definitely had a ripple effect. Some Jews even condemn Talmunism. Really enough, yeah, true. See, I was in a bookshop recently, right? And I pondered the idea of buying the Talmud. I didn't do it because I think it would piss me off. Like I think if I read the Talmud, it would kind of just trigger me and make me sick. But I sort of skimmed through it a little bit, and I thought about buying it. And it did occur to me that the vast majority of Jews that I've come across have never read the Talmud. The vast majority of Jews that I've come across don't consider the Talmud to be canonic. They don't consider it to be an official part of Scripture. And a lot of people on the reactionary right like to bring up the Talmud, and as if it's the actual Scripture that most people in the Jewish community go by. But that's really not true, or at least it's not been it's not been my personal experience. Yeah, some of the pro-Palestine Jews speak to Hamas. You would be surprised, honestly, the amount of Jews that are openly in support of Islamic terrorism. It's shocking to me, and it's quite scary. And again, you'd be surprised with the amount of Jews that are leftists. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but it's the truth. Leftist protesters in the UK have very high quality signs, heavily protected by police. Yeah, and I tell you one thing: the Palestine protesters always have minders. They always have police protection every single time. And when they get filmed, they get very, very violent. They hate being filmed. Again, go and look at some of Charlie Veitch's videos. They absolutely hate being filmed, and they hate their true agendas and their true occupations being shown, because again, a lot of these people don't work. A lot of them don't have jobs. A lot of them are government spies, essentially government provocateurs, and that's why they don't like to be filmed and exposed. Do you believe 9/11 was an inside job? As I've heard conspiracies about it from people like David Icke. Still shocking that something like that happened one day, despite it being 24 years ago. I've no idea. It most likely was. It most likely was. I mean, I very much doubt it was just like a bunch of Arabs in a cave that hijacked a plane and flew it into a building, and the building just fell down like that. No, I believe it was an inside job. But the question is, who did it? The question is, who on the inside commissioned it? I don't know, and I'm not even going to speculate. And I don't think there's any way I could ever possibly have the resources to know. So I'm not really gonna speculate. I don't see the point. I don't see the point in speculating. is the based hatred Israel faces is because the president is milking us and has bragged about flooding our borders. Well, is that what Netanyahu said? Well, again, just so you know, I do not support Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't support that guy. I don't support his party. I think that guy's a psycho, if truth be told. And a lot of people in Israel don't support him either, believe it or not. Hey, Nordic Warrior. Hey, how's it going? Any thoughts on Crawford police incident? I don't know about that. Sorry, I've not looked into it. Why? What happened with Crawford? Didn't Muhammad want to kill himself after the revelation? Then someone stopped him. Yep, he did. In fact, Muhammad attempted to kill himself numerous times because he went absolutely insane, and it's generally believed that he was demonically possessed, and that was why. But his own followers prevented him from killing himself. Basically, yeah, that's true. And it's crazy to me how many Muslims don't even know that, because it's not part of the dawah propaganda. The dawah deception. Again, I talked about dawah before. That's how Muslims get new converts. In fact, interestingly, another book I was reading recently, I was reading a book about Belmarsh Prison, which is one of the most famous prisons in the UK. It's the prison that Julian Assange got sent to, and Tommy Robinson, and Abu Hamza, and numerous other psychos. You know, Ian Brady, I think, went there as well. Or was that someone else? I forget. But yeah, I was reading about that prison, and it was highlighting in the book. And it was quite interesting because the book was being very delicate, because you could tell it was written by a leftist, right? But they were being very delicate when talking about Islamic extremism in prisons. And it was basically pointing out how the prison system in the UK is being used as a recruiting ground for Islamic terrorism. So basically, a young guy gets sent to prison for some petty crime, and he ends up in contact with the likes of Abu Hamza, or his predecessors, or his descendants. Sorry, you know, the people that were radicalized in that same sort of group, and they end up falling in with a Muslim gang, and then they end up getting radicalized by Islam from inside prison. So when they later get released, they get radicalized and basically turned into our enemies from within prison. The book was highlighting that issue, because you'd be surprised by the number of prisoners in the UK that are Orthodox Islam. It's actually really scary how prisons are being used to recruit for terrorism. Like, it's crazy. And it's interesting because when I got my SIA license for my security job, one of the things that we had to learn was counter-terrorism measures. So I have been trained a little bit in counter-terrorism, and one of the things that I learned was designated counter-terrorist units in the UK are called out to threats something like 30 times a week. Like there are so many, there's so much intelligence all over the country of homemade bombs being made, and targets being planned out and things like that. And the counter-terrorism units are just constantly out responding to potential threats. And a lot of it comes from stuff that's been organized in prison. Like, it's actually really scary when you think of, like, Islam is a major problem, man. Like, I think it's a bigger problem than most people are willing to admit. But again, the Jews are the problem. You know, we should be concerned about Israel. We should be concerned about the Jewish community and their infiltrating infrastructure. But we should just completely ignore radical Islam, which is literally invading our countries and openly admitting that they want to subjugate our people through offensive jihad. We should just completely ignore that, shouldn't we? Because we don't like Israel and the Jews. Like, come on, man. Kirk, even though supporting the state of Israel, never laughed at the kids being killed. Yeah, well, in fact, I've got a video which keeps getting deleted off the internet, right? But I've got it saved onto my computer, and it's Charlie Kirk talking about the possibility that there may have been a stand down order from Netanyahu on the October 7th attack, so that essentially Netanyahu's party and the IDF may have allowed it to happen, so that they could use it for propaganda for the war in Gaza. So Charlie Kirk was talking about that in the days up to his death. And of course, that's convinced a lot of reactionary rightists that it was Israel that were behind his death. I don't believe it was Israel. I don't think that's anywhere near enough to warrant them having him killed. Because, I mean, if that's the case, they would have had Nick Fuentes killed. They would have had Candace Owens killed. I mean, I don't know why they would have targeted Charlie Kirk and no one else, but yeah, I digress. What was I saying? Charlie Kirk was openly critical of Netanyahu and his party, and he talked about the fact that there was almost a civil war in Israel. I'll probably post a link somewhere to that video, but just in case it gets deleted again, I've got it saved onto my computer. It's must watch, because again, anybody that immediately reacted to Charlie's death, saying he was a Zio shill, I would urge them to watch some of those videos. He also, in some of his debates, said that he was against sending money to Israel. So I would say that Charlie Kirk, although he was in theory in support of Israel, he was more moderate on the issue than your average mainstream conservative. You know, like your average mainstream conservative bends the knee to Israel. Charlie Kirk certainly did not. You know, remember, gentlemen, the Crusades were justified. Yep. And see, I'm just mad that the Crusaders never finished the job. That's what I'm mad about right now. Yeah, I might get in big trouble for saying that. I don't care. The Crusades were, not only were they necessary, but they were entirely retaliatory. They should have happened sooner than they did, you know? Yeah, in Africa, a lot of people are turning to Christ. If you look at what's going on in Nigeria right now, there's a lot of born again Christians being slaughtered in Nigeria, you know, churches being bombed and stuff. It's horrible what's going on there, man. You know, Christians worldwide, it's not just white Christians, okay? Again, a lot of people want to always make it a race issue, and I'm not saying race doesn't matter, it does, but our brothers and sisters all over the world, you know, in Japan, in Africa, in the Middle East, that they're being absolutely terrorized all over the world. Our brothers and sisters, you know. Bro, Charlie took a lot of what he said back a couple of days before his death. He even said he has to be careful on what he says. He received death threats. People just ignore this, yeah. But most of the death threats come from the trans lobby. Let's be honest. They're the most. I mean, look at the kind of things, the kind of death threats that J.K. Rowling gets all the time. Again, and she's a liberal, like a boomer liberal. So if they would try to assassinate someone like J.K. Rowling, what do you think they were going to do to someone like Charlie Kirk? It's obvious, you know. Cheers, man. Appreciate it. How's it going, Michael? There's a verse of sword in the Quran which openly incites physical violence. It is later negated with a contradiction, but the issue is with the interpretation. It is an Afghan villager is not smart enough. Well, there's also verses in the Quran that say, "He who changes his religion, kill him." Quite brazenly, and it talks about the penalty for apostasy being capital punishment. There are Muslim YouTubers right now, who are openly stating that they would like to see Sharia law passed in all Western countries, and for apostates, and think what apostasy is, right? Apostasy is ex-Muslims, people who used to be Muslims but they left the faith, right? The penalty for that is capital punishment. Okay, and that is well known within Islamic scriptures. Okay, so if you look at somebody like the apostate prophet, he's a popular ex-Muslim YouTuber. He's a guy who they've made videos stating that if they take over, or if Muslims take power, they will have him. The capital punishment will be applied to him, and the same goes for all apostates. Now, how it's applied to people like me, we're obviously not apostates because we're not Muslims, and we never have been, right? We're Christians, right? Or I assume you are. I am a Christian, right? People like me would be subjugated. We wouldn't just be executed right away unless we fought back, right? If we surrendered, we would be violently subjugated and forced to pay the jizya, which basically means we pay a tax to the Muslim rulers of whatever our region we live in is, so that we can continue to live and work in our community, in our country. But if we want to continue to pray and live out our Christian faith, we have to pay the jizya. We're obviously like below second-class citizens in that situation, right? That's the situation you'll have if Islam isn't challenged, all right? And again, you want me to empathize with the people of Gaza when the vast majority of the people in that nation hold that worldview and view me as a kuffar, an enemy of Islam. You want me to empathize with those people. Like I cannot for the life of me get my head around any reactionary rightist believing that. I really can't. But how do you know Israel definitely killed Charlie Kirk? Like, do you have evidence of this? Do you have evidence of this? And you say they did 9/11 too. Why did Israel do 9/11? Why? And I'm not saying you're wrong, but what evidence or reason to believe that do you have? How does it help Israel? Again, there's no proof. As far as we know, it was some gay trans activist who used to watch furry porn, and those are some of the most violent people you'll ever meet. They're literally demonic possessed reprobates. Okay, and look, I know a thing or two about demonic possession. I deal with it every shift. When you're dealing with drunk idiots, those people are very open to demonic possession. Got a couple more hard man bouncer stories I could tell you. We'll get to that later, but yeah, or maybe not. Just look at history to see what it would do in the future. Yeah, yeah. Look at history. Look at how Islam was spread. Look at the amount of countries that they violently subjugated. And it wasn't until the Crusades that they had to tone down their Islamic empire. You know, terrible take, bro. Watch more documentaries about World War One. Well, look, you don't know what documentaries I've watched, and you don't know what books I've read, and you don't know what research I've done. So to say it's a terrible take without providing any sort of counter argument or any refutation of your own. Again, Jews funded slavery. Says who? And what Jews funded slavery? Who are you talking about? Which faction in particular? So if I go to like a local synagogue, did the people in there did they fund slavery? Who are you talking about? Give me some names. You don't even need to give me personal names. Just give me a faction. What faction are you talking about? Are you talking about the Sanhedrin? Who are you talking about? Like people that go on about the Jays are conservatives that blame them for supporting policies that destroy their nation. Yeah, exactly. See, the Jays recognize that mass immigration and things of that nature and trying to live in harmony with Islam is a problem. But because we don't recognize it and we don't take action against it, we should see them as our enemies instead, because they're a little bit more pragmatic than us, I guess, There are other bad guys, but Israel is enemy number one. Why is Israel enemy number one? Why is one of the smallest countries in the world that is surrounded by the Islamic world? Why are they enemy number one? Why should I be more concerned about Israel than Muslim grooming gangs in my own country? Again, there aren't Jews in my country going around raping little kids. That's Islam that's doing that. Okay, so you're not making much sense, buddy. Both groups are a problem, yeah. The bubonic plague was caused by a Jewish rabbi. Well, maybe it was, but again, what does that have to do with anything we're talking about? What does that have to do with Israel being the enemy? I don't know what have you asked Jews about their Talmud? Exactly. Ask, have you ever met a Jew? Again, I honestly wonder if some of the guys that say this stuff have ever actually gone outside and spoken to a Jew before and asked them about politics and asked them about their theology. Because if you did, you'd find that it's not as black and white as you might think, They all believe it deep down. It's in their religion, so it's all of them. Is it though? Because their religion comes from the exact same source as ours. It comes from the Old Testament. Okay, now as a Christian, I believe the Old and New Testament, right? As do many Messianic Jews, all right? Because you can talk about Jews being a race, right? But you can also talk about them being a religion, right? Because not all Jews are religious, obviously, right? But the ones who are religious, and the ones I've spoken to, many of them are messianic. Many of them believe in Christ. The ones who aren't, I've found, tend to be leftists. Shout out, Dale. How you doing, man? God bless you. Who's Rabbi Shmuley? Mate, forget I said anything. Don't look that guy up. Forget I said anything. It's all the J's. But again, you don't know that, do you? Again, you're some random guy calling yourself Liam. You're probably a Muslim. And you've probably never met a Jew in your life, buddy. That's all I can assume. The whole community and Rabbi Shmuley, are you a fan? I wish I never said that, man. Shout out Rabbi Shmuley. I wish I never said that. Oh, it's funny. Journalists spearing about the Ali Act is annoying. Oh yeah, mate. Who even heard about the Muhammad Ali Act before the past year? Like, no one talked about that in the YTBC. I've never even heard anybody talk about it in the boxing media before. That's just a thing people are now talking about because of the whole Turkey Al Sheep phenomenon. That's not even an issue, you know. Nordic should order a Chinese from. I had a Chinese last week. I would see last week. I was minding somebody's property for them up in Ayrshire, and there was a Chinese right round the corner. It was banging, like one of the best Chinese I've ever had. And I was thinking, like, this dude, because basically the house I was minding, like the property, the guy who lived there, he's got like a big ass garden, and he's got like apple trees and everything. The place was beautiful, right? And I was just thinking, I was like sitting there, and I'm thinking, if I lived here, I would be a right fat ass living here because I wouldn't be able to resist that Chinese. I'd be there like every week, you know. There was also like a banging Italian restaurant right on the corner, right near it. I'm like, I want to live here. This place is banging, you know. Where was I? Yeah, yeah, it could be both. They could be really, really dumb. Is it really a secret HQ or is that just your local takeaway? No, 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 no. I'm serious about that. There's a restaurant in Glasgow. Look this up, and there's actually articles about it. Count Dankula was talking about it. It's a restaurant called Loon Fung. It's a popular. I forget if it's still open, but it was a very popular Chinese restaurant in Glasgow city centre, and it turned out it was a secret police office for or it was a secret HQ for the Chinese secret police working on behalf of communist China, and they were keeping tabs on a lot of Chinese nationals who are living in different communities around the city and stuff like that. That was a secret police for them. Sorry, a headquarters for the secret police, and it got found out. And yeah, there was a big commotion about it. Like the government here were livid about it and everything. It was quite interesting. It was a couple of years ago that boss might be watching. Oh yeah, yeah, my boss might be watching. Yeah, yeah. Could you imagine that? I tell you one thing. I hope not. Mate, if my boss is watching this stream, I'm sacked. I'm sacked on the spot, and I love my job. I get to beat up dickheads. So, um, yeah. Speaking of, I got attacked by a drug dealer a couple of weeks back, and he ended up on his arse. It was quite crazy. I'll tell you guys about it in a bit. Russia and China exported tons of spies and brought off many people working in the government. Yep, they did. And they also infiltrated the church, which a lot of people don't know. And there was actually a lot of communists who worked their way up the church and became pastors. And they tried to teach people that like communism is like the next stage in humanity, and it's brought to us by God, which is obviously different to how the Soviet Union did it. Because what the Soviet Union did was they educated people in schools to view Lenin and Stalin and the communist leaders of the time as basically a manifestation of God, or an alternative to God. They taught people that no matter how hard you pray, you'll never get what you want. And you can sit in a classroom and pray for candy, but it won't appear. But if you ask Lenin for candy, he'll give it to you. That was how they brainwashed little kids in the Soviet Union to renounce Christianity, right? And they also claimed, and this is another thing a lot of people don't know, but I've talked before, I believe, about how church bells are believed to ward off demons, right? And what the Soviet Union did was they claimed that there was a steel shortage, right? So they had to demolish all of the church bells, remove them, and use them to account for the shortage in steel, right? In my opinion, the reason they did that, the reason they got rid of the church bells was because communism is literally satanic. It's demonic. Like there was a lot of demonic possession in the ruling elite in the Soviet Union and in communism in general. So they got rid of the church bells so that they couldn't be exposed, essentially. That's another thing a lot of people don't know. Yeah, communism doesn't work. It can't work. It's flawed. It's satanic, in my opinion. A lot of female spies from Russia and Lithuania. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, because Russia and Lithuania in those days were the Soviet Union. And like I said before, when the Soviet Union was dying, they realized they couldn't hold on to that empire, nor could they conquer any other lands. They could only do so from within. Okay, that was what that dude Yuri Bemzov talked about. Charlie Kirk's organization, the Turning Point, they involved themselves in a documentary that was made about the Soviet Union and their communist takeover recently. I'd urge anybody to go and watch that. Why would any Muslim watch you, Nordic? Are there ex-Muslims, which I feel sorry for? Yeah, so that's the thing. Like, look, I know a lot of Muslims. I do, and that's the thing. I'm always honest with them about what I feel about Islam because it's false. But the problem with it is a lot of them are so radicalized to the point where they cannot be reasoned with. They would sooner blow themselves up than have a theological debate with a Christian. Like they would. Like, if I was to try to convince a Muslim to read Mere Christianity, they would probably tear the pages out and get angry and shout Alhamdulillah and then bloody, I don't know, like do a 9/11 or something. Lots on the right on X have fell in love with Adolf as well. They must have missed the part where he was a militant socialist and atheist. Yeah, exactly. They think Adolf Hitler was like he's their hero. He's like the ultimate right wing conservative when the dude was literally a vegetarian socialist atheist. Yeah, not for me personally. Not for me. You have a boxing channel, so of course you can have Muslims watching. Yeah. Well, I guess if I talk about Amir Khan or Hamza Shiraz, then yeah. Read the Gulag Archipelago. Do you know what? I'm going to add that to my list. I've got a list on my emails of all the books I'm going to buy and read. I'm going to add that to the list. I'm going to read that. And maybe I'll review it. Maybe I will. I'm assuming it talks about communism and the Soviet Union. I definitely want to read more about that, Muslims are calling for a caliphate, are stupid and don't realize they are outnumbered heavily. Islam tried to conquer Europe for 14,000 years and failed and will fail again. No, do you know, I understand what you're saying, but there's one thing that you've overlooked. One thing that you've overlooked is the fact that Muslims are breeding at an alarming rate. They're moving into Europe, they're moving into Western countries, and they are having loads of kids. They're radicalizing them like crazy, and they're also using, like I said, the prison system. The prison system's being used to recruit. So Islam is a lot more powerful now than it was in the the 7th century when Muhammad was around, and the centuries that preceded or that came after. It's a lot more effective now at converting, and the dawah is getting a lot more deceptive than it ever was. So I wouldn't be so sure of that. The Muslims don't realize they're going to be Africans and Indians, part of the multicultural part, and will have clashes with them. Yeah, there'll always be cultural differences, even if they have the same religion. But again, I don't think that really matters to the Islamic elite because, again, they just see us all as, they don't really care too much about race. To them, we're all kuffar. Like if I converted to Islam and started calling myself a Muslim, they would welcome me and radicalize me and probably have me commit some atrocities if they could do so. But they wouldn't care too much about my race. Like that's another thing. Muslims aren't as concerned about race as you might think. They're not as concerned about race as like the black Hebrew Israelites or even like white nationalists and stuff like that. Like you'd be surprised how quote unquote inclusive the Islamic community is, and that's not a good thing, by the way. I thought C.S. Lewis was an atheist. Reads his books as well. No. C.S. Lewis used to be an atheist. He spent a lot of his life as an atheist. Later in life, he became a born-again Christian, and he wrote Christian theology. And most of it, like obviously, he wrote children's books, like the Narnia books, right, which were an allegory for biblical stories, right? They were kind of his way of getting kids into thinking about the stories of the Bible, right? But putting them in his own words, essentially. But his later work, so his adult work, is mostly about Christian theology, as well as his personal biography was about that too. And the book I'm reading right now, again, as I mentioned, I'm reading. I'm going to read Miracles, but right now I'm reading Mere Christianity. It was actually it was composed of, or it was derived from a lot of talks that he gave on wartime broadcasts during World War II, I believe. Where he was basically preaching to the soldiers and trying to get them to think about their eternal soul and stuff like that, as well as what it means to actually live like a Christian. That's what that book essentially is derived from. But obviously, it was modernized and edited, and he checked it over and over again and made sure that it was authenticated and stuff like that. And I believe it was originally published in 1952. But again, a lot of it is derived from a lot of his older works, and it all comes together into what, in my opinion, is one of the best theological Christian books of all time. Like I would definitely recommend that book. Because again, it'll answer a lot of questions. Like if you're an atheist and you want to know, like, the classic, if God real, why bad thing happen? The dumbest, like, stupid question you ever hear, but it's the one that atheists always, spew all over the internet. If they had read Mere Christianity, they wouldn't even think to answer that question, or they wouldn't even think to ask that question. They would realize what a stupid question it is, and they would realize that they've got the concept of suffering, bad, good, right, and wrong completely. They've got it completely wrong. They would realize it if they read that book. So I think that book should be mandatory reading in schools, in religious studies, and it should be any atheist before they have a right to, these people you see on Reddit, right, who post all this copy pasta all over the place, and the kind of questions that they ask. That there have been books written on the subject since the days of Aristotle, right, or even earlier, and the likes of C.S. Lewis. They did their best to answer these questions in great detail, so we shouldn't even have to do it. But the fact that normies don't read, the fact that normies don't educate themselves, and they want to be spoon-fed information, essentially, means that we've got to bang our heads against a wall trying to educate these people. But I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to tell these people, listen, if you're going to ask me that stupid question, go and read C.S. Lewis and educate yourself on how Christians think, first of all, and educate yourself on what we actually believe, Christian theology. It's very important, Love the Punisher profile picture, huge theory. I believe it was Jews who created Islam to try to divide, essentially seeing all the elites are also Jewish. It's an interesting theory, I guess, but I mean, let's be honest, nobody has suffered more at the hands of Islam than Jews, have they? So, I mean, it's kind of self-defeating in my opinion. But again, I wouldn't rule it out. I just don't necessarily agree with it at first glance. The changing of language, definitions, etc., is what I call pathological vagueness. It's the best description of cultural Marxist tactics. Absolutely. What the cultural Marxists do is they take words and they turn them into swear words. And again, I was just talking about C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. One of the things that C.S. Lewis talks about in the early part of the book, and I'll see if I can get it up here, he talks about how words get used out of context in a benevolent sense, right? You don't want to upset anybody. You don't want to offend anybody. So you try and change the meaning of a word for it to be more inclusive. And what it does is it destroys the very meaning of that word. So what he talks about here is he talks about the word gentleman and what the word gentleman means. And bear in mind that this book came out in the 1950s and it's derived from writings from the 40s, right? So long time ago, way ahead of its time. And C.S. Lewis talks about how the word gentleman has had a specific dictionary definition. It meant a person of a particular distinction, with somebody who owns land and has a particular rank in society, right? That's what a gentleman was. So when you call somebody a gentleman, you weren't complimenting him, and you weren't taken away from him, right? It wasn't a positive or a negative trait. It wasn't based on feeling. You weren't insulting a person or you weren't paying him a compliment. You were just stating a fact of what he is. Like a person could be a good person and be a gentleman. Likewise, they could be a bad person and be a gentleman. It just so happens that in any case, he's a gentleman, right? But what ended up happening due to cultural Marxism getting involved, and again, I talked about how communists basically infiltrated the school system, right? And tried to change academia in general, right? So the word gentleman was seen as kind of a swear word. It's like if you're saying someone's a gentleman, you're saying he's better than everyone else. So they changed the meaning to say that if you're calling someone a gentleman, it's based on the type of person they are. Like if somebody's nice, if somebody's polite, if somebody's friendly, and that's obviously what people mean today when they call someone a gentleman, right? They say, "Oh, he's a really nice guy. He's a gentleman. He's so kind. He's so respectful." And by using, or somebody like takes a woman out on a date, he's a gentleman, right? You know, if he's chivalrous, things like that. What they did was they took a word that had a specific dictionary definition, a specific meaning, and they completely bastardized it and made it a word based on feeling rather than fact. So now nobody even knows what the word means. Like if I was to ask you to determine, like off the top of your head, to define what do I mean by the word gentleman? What does that word mean? You wouldn't even be able to tell me. You would probably think to yourself, well, it could mean you're nice, or it can mean you're well dressed, or something like it. It can mean you're well mannered. It can mean that you're very very generous. Thing like there's no actual definition anymore of the word gentleman, and that's because, as C.S. Lewis points out in his book, cultural Marxism bastardized the word, for want of a better term. It took the word and made it mean nothing. And again, it goes back to what I was saying in that video about buzzwords. These words that get used don't really mean anything because they're used out of context. They don't have, or they don't adhere to the actual dictionary definition of these words. You're absolutely right. That's what cultural Marxist does, you know. Aslan is basically Jesus. Michael, yeah, he is. Yeah, he's an allegory for Jesus. And he was voiced by Liam Neeson in the movie. I actually quite like that movie. I think it's quite entertaining. And I liked the book as a kid as well. Yeah, and Turkish Delight is sin, similar to the apple in the story of Adam and Eve. The Turkish Delight looked so good in the movie. Yeah, it did. And that's the thing. She tempted, I forget the kid's name. Was it Edmund or whatever? But the white bitch, whatever her name was. Yeah, she's kind of like the devil figure in the movie, isn't she? And she tempts the boy, I think his name was Edmund. She tempts him into eating the Turkish Delight, and he gets addicted by it. Like we get addicted to sin, and he forsakes his own family as a result of it. You know, that was quite an interesting story, I thought. Yeah, some of the millennial boomer Gen X parents are clueless. I hate to bring generation in, but they have it only temporary attitude, or he's just a little slow. Yeah, they do. Yeah. They don't realize when their own kid is literally being radicalized by furries and is turning into a degenerate and is watching left wing influences and being told that we're all fascists. And then they get surprised when they go and shoot up a school or something, you know? Oh, man. It's crazy. A lot of left-wing idiot protesters don't work but are paid by government. Yeah, they are. Yeah, a lot of them are. That's absolutely true. A lot of them are just agent provocateurs, and that's why they don't like being filmed. You know, gaps in their employment history start to be exposed. You know, most Jews ever read the Talmud. It's very hard to understand. Yeah, and it's a massive book as well. Like the Talmud I saw in the bookshop recently was even bigger than the King James Bible. It's a massive book, but it's not considered canonic. I don't know anybody in any Jews I've ever spoken to, or any born again Christians who I've ever spoken to. I don't know any of them who consider the Talmud to be canon, you know, to be a canonic part of Scripture. I've never met a single one in my entire life. I don't think I've ever met a person who actually goes by the Talmud in any way, shape, or form, or has any reverence for it whatsoever. Like again, you'll meet numerous people who go by the Torah, numerous people who go by the King James Bible, but you'll never meet anybody who goes by the Talmud. I mean, the King James Bible is the most, as far as I can tell, anyway, is the most authentic translation of the original Greek and Hebrew scriptures, anyway. So, what's even the point in going by anything else? I just don't really see the point. Except it can be a little bit tricky to read sometimes, the King James Bible, because it's in Old English. Back in a second, I'm just going to get my charger, and I'll get a can out the fridge, because why not? Okay, sorry about that. Where was I? I'll scroll back up. There's another theory that they allowed it to happen along with lying about and beheading, no proof. Yeah, Norman Finkelstein said at times Israel was on the verge of civil war. That's exactly what Charlie Kirk said. He said the exact same thing. Again, and that's what fascinates me about the state of Israel, probably more than anything else. The fact that it is such a small country, like one of the smallest countries in the world. But ever since its inception, and again, I've read about this in great detail, ever since its inception, there has been so many different parties that disagreed with each other. And it's been on the verge of civil war numerous times over the years. And it's only when there's a time of crisis or you get some sort of emergency government that they tend to unify. And obviously, right now, that's one of those times because of that October 7th terrorist attack. And what Charlie Kirk was talking about and what he was implying, well, in fact, he didn't even imply it, he flat out said it, that it was a possibility that Netanyahu's party, because they were losing power and they were becoming a lot less popular within the other factions of Israel, that they may have instructed the IDF to stand down and allow it to happen so that they could essentially use it as wartime propaganda. Again, a similar situation to what a lot of people believe about 9/11. You know, that's it's a similar theory. Again, I'm not saying that I agree with it, but one of the points that Charlie made in a separate interview, I believe, was he talked about that when he visited Israel, he traveled across it in a helicopter, and it took him 45 minutes or so to get from one side of the country to the other. And he talked about how the IDF, if they were informed about the attack on October 7th, would have been able to make it in half the time, probably. So, or that was what he was implying anyway. So he was implying that there could have been that Netanyahu personally or somebody within his establishment could have ordered a stand down so that they could allow the attack to happen, basically. And a person like Netanyahu, I would not put it past that guy because again, I do believe that guy is a psychopath. I do believe it. Yeah, black Christians are being attacked constantly in Nigeria. Yeah, they are, and you don't hear anything about that from the media. You know, the supposed pro black media don't say anything about Christians being blown up in Nigeria, do they? And they don't talk about the same thing going on in Azerbaijan, do they? In Armenia, that you've never heard them talk about that once, have you? Right wing people also don't account that Sikhs and Hindus and Africans are also coming into the country. It's not just Islam. Yeah, true. But Islam is definitely the most radical. Again, as I talked about before, the prison system in the UK is literally being used as a recruiting ground for radical Islam. And most people on the reactionary right won't even talk about that and won't even highlight it. But again, it's concerning to me. It really is. Nordic, have you watched the movie Silence about the Japanese Christians being persecuted? I have, yeah. That's that one starring Andrew Garfield and Liam Neeson. I think I've got that on DVD. I watched it once. It was directed, if I'm not mistaken, by what's his name? Scorsese. I think he directed that. Interesting movie, but I do kind of think there was a little bit of subtle anti-Christian propaganda in that movie. I'll probably talk about it one day, but I did enjoy the movie. I thought it was a good movie. It's been several years since I watched it though. Why don't they teach about World War One in school? Well, they do, but they teach more about World War Two, and that's always kind of bothered me. You know, the dancing Israeli is suspect, but Israel has celebrated multiple attacks on the West. Yeah, they have. Yeah, no doubt about it. I've met a few Jews for Jesus in Hendon in London. Nice fellas. Yeah. There's a lot of messianic Jews all over the world, and a lot of them, again, it tends to be the messianic ones I've found that are more in support of Israel. Ironically enough, the leftist Jews seem to support Palestine, which is shocking to me. You know, again, you're supporting Hamas, a literal, the most like violent death cult we've ever seen in our lifetimes, and you would support them over the state of Israel just because you don't like Netanyahu or because you don't like Jews. Like, I can't get my head around that. I just want to know why they don't teach that much of World War One compared to World War Two in school, even though more people died in World. Yeah, do you know what? I agree. I agree with you there, Liam. I agree with you there. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. World War One is a criminally undertaught subject because it's a lot more ambiguous than World War Two, I would say. A lot of people are hard pressed to say that there was a good guy and a bad guy in World War One. There was atrocities committed all over the world by numerous different factions. It's a lot more. It's a lot more nuanced than World War Two, and that's probably why they don't want to teach us it. So I'll agree with you there. Weirdly enough, the countries that these migrants are coming from are not doing anything to stop them. Well, yeah, because look, any country that is majority Muslim is a shithole. Let's be honest. So of course they want to leave and come here because we're better than them. Obviously, church bells have a healing frequency, good for your body physically. Music can help plants grow, that type of thing. That's absolutely true. It's like tonal magic in a sense. I know I'm using the word magic, but it's spiritual tonal manipulation. The church bells, and like I said, they can exorcise demons. They ward away demons. And the Soviet Union was a demonic, satanic empire that could not survive along with the church. So they had to take away the church bells under false pretense. That's something a lot of people don't know. It surprising to me that a lot of people don't know that about the Soviet Union, but they should. You've seen the film The Fighter about Irish Mickey Ward, Nordic starring Mark Wahlberg. Yeah, I saw that in cinema when it came out. It's okay, decent movie. I don't mind it. I've read the Bible many times, learn new stuff every time. Also read the Quran once. I've never read the Quran, but I have studied it. Like I've studied Islamic theology quite a bit. I know a lot more about it than the average person, including the average Muslim, believe it or not. But I don't see the point in actually reading the Quran because I don't believe it. But I do study aspects of it that affect me and my people. And offensive jihad is pretty much exclusively, it pretty much unilaterally believed among Orthodox Muslims, Quran says to kill and subjugate us. If we don't convert, pay them protection tax, they can lie to us, endless ill to us. Yeah, that's called the jizya. That's what I was talking about before. So again, I want for anybody who's new here, if you're an apostate to Islam, so if you were a Muslim and you leave the faith, you will be executed publicly. You will face capital punishment in Sharia law, right? If you're a Christian, however, or a Jew, depending on your willingness to stand and fight, like if you surrender and allow them into your country, they will allow you to live. But what they will do is, like you say, they force you to pay the jizya, which is a tax on the unbelievers. It's a tax on us having the right to continue our worship privately, but we have to do so under the subjugation of Islam or under an Islamic state. Now, I don't know about you, but as a born-again Christian, I would rather die. I would rather be publicly executed for standing up for Jesus Christ than I would pay the jizya and live under Islamic tyranny. I would much rather be a martyr for Christ. I would, So much for laughing at Christianity going down. Even their people are getting brainwashed by Western propaganda. Yeah, not enough though. Like there should be more Western propaganda. There should be more Christian propaganda. There should be, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. We'll give it a read. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody who's listening to this, read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And when I finish the book, and I'm nearly finished, I'm going to do a review for it. Might be my next video. Before I do my next boxing video. God gave us free will. Yep, God gave us the will to make our own minds up. He gave us intelligence. He gave us the ability to discern right and wrong for ourselves. He gave us free will. You see, that's another thing in the book. I know I'm shilling this book like crazy, but that's another thing that C.S. Lewis talked about in that book, right? He talked about how atheists want to believe, or people who just can't get their head around the Trinity and can't get their head around Christianity, they want to believe that God would make us like robots, essentially. He compares it to basically a sculpture making a statue, or a manufacturer creating robots, or even a toy maker. He mentions toy makers at one point, or he mentions having toy soldiers. If you have a collection of toy soldiers, let's say you made them yourself, you make them exactly the way you want them to be. But if you give them free will, those toy soldiers will do things you don't agree with. They'll disobey you. They'll disobey your laws, and they'll no longer be toy soldiers. They'll be living, breathing, thinking, thriving people with their own souls, right? That's what having a soul is. It's being made in the image of God, right? God made us all, okay, and he gave us all free will. Without that free will, we would be automatons. And that seems to be one of the arguments made by atheists is if God is real and if he is a good God, he would have made us all slaves to his will. But that's not how it works. Okay, that's not what Christians believe in. That's not our theology. And C.S. Lewis did a great job of breaking down the flawed logic with those beliefs of atheists. He also did a great job at breaking down the flawed logic of New Age philosophy and idolatry. And this is something that I often warn people of. When people tell me, I believe in God, but I don't read the Bible, or I believe in God, but I don't believe in your religion, this, that, and the other, I say to them, right, so you say you believe in God, but you don't believe in the triune God of the Holy Bible. Who are you worshipping? Are you either you're a pagan or you're an idolater? Okay, you're breaking one of the 10 commandments. What you're doing there is you're creating your own version of God in your head that you feel comfortable with. And again, this is another thing that C.S. Lewis talked about. If you're to create your own version of God in your own mind that you're comfortable with, that you personally agree with, what you're essentially doing is you're creating a situation where you have no responsibility and you can pick and choose what laws to believe. You can pick and choose your idea of right and wrong because you don't have an objective moral standard. That's the problem with idolatry. So be very, very careful around people who tell you that they're religious, or more specifically, people that tell you they believe in God, but they don't believe in scripture. Because if they're not going by scripture, they're not really going by anything, or they're certainly not going by anything good. Yeah, to try to tell atheists that, and again, they'll just go back to Reddit and post more copy pasta, more Richard Dawkins quotes, more, if God real, why I not have everything I want? That kind of, why I not get everything my way? That kind of thing. Yeah, how's it going, Mark? Predictions for Alan Makhmadov. As long as Makhmadov doesn't tire, he'll win that fight. But he might tire and get knocked out. You never know. Parker, I think, will school Wardley. I give Wardley a puncher's chance, but Parker will probably school him. Yeah, Dave Allen's training for that fight. So he's actually become the favourite in Betfred. I was thinking of placing a bet, and he's become the favourite, Yeah, it's been said by many, the stuff I've personally seen, like videos and stuff about Jews creating Islam, I wouldn't rule it out. Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out either. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense, personally. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. You see the Batman trilogy. Which one? Are you on about the Dark Knight trilogy? If so, I like the first two. I don't like the third one. I only like the first two. Great movies. Turkish Delight is good. Not gonna lie, I used to hate it as a kid. Yeah, I like Turkish Delight. It's nice. My missus, her dad, is obsessed with Turkish Delight. He gets it every birthday and Christmas, I think. I've not had it in a while, mind. The new Superman movie. I've not seen the new Superman movie, but I did see Man of Steel. Wasn't a big fan of it. Sorry, just opening my can. Why does the older generation play the victim and say the later generation, you had everything I did? Mate, I get so pissed off when I come across boomer liberals who tell us that we have it easy. They bought a house for what, 35 grand, 20 years ago on a one, on a one earner budget. What am I trying to say? What's the word I'm trying to say? One breadwinner in the family, and they were able to buy a house with 3 bedrooms for 35 grand. And then they tell us we have it easy when we literally have to be wage slaves to get anywhere near that. And we have to have everybody in the household earning a wage, Yo, shout out to the Fight Scout. How's it going, man? God bless you, man. Go check out the Fight Scout. He's been making some great videos, man. Forget ideology. Just seeing their kid is clearly disabled or struggling learning-wise, and then that kid grows up to struggle in life, yeah. Look, I've seen it numerous times. You get people who clearly have problems growing up, and the parents either don't recognize it or they don't care, and they don't do nothing about it. It's sad, it really is. And there are different versions of the Babylonian Talmud. So some versions may not have the atrocities in it. Yeah, that's true. And again, I don't think that the Talmud is even canonical anyway, and I've never met anybody who does. So I don't even pay it much attention, to be honest, you know. Baby boomer generation had it easy, cheap housing, low immigration. Oh yeah. So that's another thing. They didn't have to deal with race quotas. You know, they didn't get turned down for jobs because they weren't dark enough, or you know, they haven't sucked enough cock. You know, they didn't get refused opportunities for being people like me. You know, for rabbinic Jews, the Talmud and the Torah are both valid. For Christians, not at all. Judaism doesn't have a pope or anything. So they recorded rabbi teachings or debates as well as other stuff. Yeah. You're right about that. Much like anti-Semitic is to understand who the Semitics worship. Yeah. But again, I talked about that earlier in the stream. I don't use the term anti-Semitic because to me, anti-Semitic is just a buzzword. It's no different to calling someone a fascist. It's the same dumb shit that people say to alleviate themselves from criticism. Again, that's what the negative Jewish factions that I was talking about before, like the ADL and APAC and whatnot, they use the term anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic, to protect themselves from any criticism, to shield themselves from valid criticism, more specifically, you know. Norman implied Destiny was an idiot who knew nothing. Oh, Destiny is an idiot. Destiny's just an autist, you know. They've changed that term to be anti-Jew and to group all of them together. Yeah, that's true because that's not what that term means. Again, it's cultural Marxism. That's what Del Boy was bringing up earlier about how Marxism takes the meaning of words, the dictionary definition, and turns them into swear words. That's what it does. So anti-Semitism might have been questioning not only who the Jews worship, but who they're actually descended by or who they're descended from, because there's a lot of disagreements about that within the Jewish community. But it's been changed to mean, oh, you're anti-Semitic, you just hate all Jews, which of course doesn't make any sense. Okay, criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu and certain aspects of the state of Israel and some of the atrocities they've committed does not mean that you hate Jews. That doesn't mean that you're going to go out and attack your local synagogue. It doesn't mean that, you know. It's ridiculous. One interesting thing about Israel is it's the only developed advanced nation with a fertility rate above replacement rate. Yeah. But then again, that is to be expected with how small the nation is. Okay, Israel is again, it's a relatively young nation. Okay, it's less than 100 years old when you consider it, and it's a nation that was founded largely off the back of terrorism. That's what a lot of people don't realize, is that every single time an outside faction tried to mediate the conflict. So when you had the British who took control of Israel, the British faced like untold numbers of terrorist attacks from the Jews of the time, who saw it as their God-given right to rule that land uninterrupted. And when the Americans later took over, when the Brits backed out, they faced the same problem. So a lot of the terrorism back in the day, you know, when Israel was fighting for independence, came from the Jews. But in recent years, the vast majority of terrorism has come from Islam. And for them, it's actually coming directly from their scriptures, you know, which is concerning. It is. Yeah, I hate it when the older generation play the victims. Yeah, quality of life is getting worse now when social circles are messed up. And let's not forget, let's never forget this. The quality of life is getting worse because of them. It's getting worse because of the decisions they made prior to our birth. Okay, so when these like 50, 60-year-old like boomer liberals complain about how we have everything easy and we're lazy and this and we don't want to work as hard, it's not that we don't want to work as hard. It's that we were told growing up, people of my generation, that if you work really, really hard, you'll make something of your life, you'll achieve something. And that's not necessarily true, because our needs and our well-being is being sidelined because of mass immigration and cultural Marxism. Okay, what's in our interest is not in the interest of the establishment that rules over us, and that's because our boomer ancestors allowed it to be that way. They didn't. I mean, why did communism take over Russia? Why did it take over the Soviet Union and destroy the Orthodox Church? Because the Orthodox Church of the time didn't take it seriously. They didn't take it seriously as a threat. So communism crept its way in and absolutely destroyed the Soviet Empire. Okay, I know the Soviet Empire was largely built on communism. That's kind of the point, isn't it? It was doomed to fail from the very beginning. And that the same thing's happening to us. Communism has absolutely infested the West, and it's only unless it's purged out, it's only going to go one way. Even though there are people who worship that aren't of that ethnic group. Kirk also said that if he was murdered, it was going to be from the Israeli, I believe. Do you know, I've seen that comment. I've seen several people say it, but I haven't actually heard Charlie Kirk say it out of his own mouth. I've tried to find it. But what I have found is I've found Charlie Kirk openly criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu and his Israeli party. Like I've heard him openly criticize them. I've heard him ask questions about them, but I've never actually heard him say he was concerned that Israel were going to assassinate him. I've got a feeling that's not true, but until I hear him say it, then I'm not going to jump to any conclusions. Yeah, older generation are soft and had it easy. All greedy, second homes, boomers ruined society. Yeah, they did. They did. They ruined society because they got things easy. It's like that old saying: hard times create weak men. Weak men create hard. Something along those lines. You know what I'm saying? Weak men create hard times. Basically, that's what it is, and that's why. Again, I'm going to make a video about this, about the concept of maturity, right? And I'm trying to think of how to word it. I'm not really sure, but basically, obviously with my job and with me interacting with the public quite often and different generations and whatnot, and just my own experience of growing up, what I witnessed from the generations above and below me, I've realized that people of the boomer generation, so people, they might not exactly be boomers, but again, baby boomers and boomers, so people from the ages of, say, like late 40s to early 60s, I've noticed that people from that generation are incredibly immature. They are emotionally immature. They are psychologically immature. They're very, very immature people. They're very weak mentally people, right? They're the first people to blame mental health for all their problems. They're the first people to dump all their problems onto their children. They're the first people to flat out abuse their children. They're a very abusive generation. Okay, they're a very they're a generation that are very lacking in self-awareness. If you look at my generation, now I'm 31 years old. I was born in 1994. I'm the same age as Charlie Kirk, right? We're 31. My generation is a lot more measured. We're a lot more well-read. We're a lot more articulate. I'm not saying I'm particularly articulate. I'm not, but I'm getting there, right? But in general, my generation are more politically aware. We're more optimistic in a lot of ways. And again, we have the kind of interests that people of, say, like the 1930s would have had, essentially, reading, literature, just intellectual debates, again, politics, but looking at politics rationally and not through emotions and things like that. You look at all these boomer liberals that you see out marching for Palestine and all that stuff, like as if they give a shit about what goes on in the Middle East. They don't even care about their own people. You look at how these people, there's so many alcoholics from that generation. So many people from that generation are flat out illiterate. So many of them abandon their children, abuse their partners, abuse their children. So many of them have very, very childish mentalities. So many of them can't have a conversation without being vulgar. I've just found that those generations, men of that, particularly men, women too, but particularly men of that generation, are horribly immature people. Again, it tends to be, I would say, from my experience, late 40s to early 60s. The people of that generation are, in general, very, very immature people. The people of my generation, and I'm not just being biased, right? Because there's a lot about my generation, like a lot about my generation you can criticize, right? But the people of my generation, and you can see that on the YTBC. If you look at like the 50-year-olds in the YTBC, that are spazzing out all the time and fanboying over fighters and getting into race wars and stuff. And you compare them to people like me, Del Boy, Mark. We're all around about the same age, right? They're all from my generation. You look at us, look at how mature we are, how well spoken we are, and how well read we are, and how politically aware we are compared to that generation before us. You compare us to someone like 78 Sports TV or the Boxing Librarian, just a couple of immature, spazzy cunts. Look at the way we behave and the way we conduct ourselves compared to them. You've literally got guys in their 50s and 60s going online arguing with teenagers on the internet about their favorite boxers and calling people fanboys and stuff, telling them to suck dick and swearing at them, getting all wound up and all that. Like again, guys in their 50s, who you think would be distinguished gentlemen by that point. But we are significantly, and again, a lot of people on here have talked about how boxing imitates life sometimes. We are so much more mature than that generation. Like when I go to work and I'm working the doors, I never have to deal with guys my age on the doors. Like I never have to throw them out. It's usually guys who are from that generation, guys in their 50s and whatnot, or it's like teenagers that are underage or guys in their early 20s, because it's like the generation below us and or maybe a couple of generations below us have reverted back to that immature state of mind. So I find the most mature people in existence right now, and the people who should be consolidating power are people of my generation, because we're just so much more mature than everyone else. And I'm not saying I don't have problems. I'm not saying I don't do stupid things. I do, but like I'm a lot more level-headed than the average person of the generation before me. And I think that my overall conduct, the way I handle myself, and again, I'm able to keep my head in very, very stressful situations. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a degenerate and stuff like that. I'm not like going out and abusing my position and stuff. Like we're the type of generation who I think should be running things right now. We're the type of generation who I think are the intellectuals. I genuinely do. I think we are, and I think our conduct proves it. You know, you ask the average 50-year-old in this country if he's ever read C.S. Lewis, he'd probably tell you he's never even heard of him, or he doesn't know much about him, and he's probably down in the pub and the bookies every other day getting pissed, and he's probably, even though he had a job for 40 years, he's probably got no money in the bank because he spent it all at the pub and he spent it all gambling. I know I'm Scottish, so maybe I'm just speaking from personal experience here, but everyone I meet from that generation, it seems like they're always broke for the most part anyway. Or, and they're so immature the way they behave. It's just something I've noticed. Again, some of my family members are like that too, and it's, again, I'm just rambling to myself at this point, aren't I? When Moses got the laws at Mount Sinai, Jews believe they also got unwritten law beamed into their heads as well. They called the oral law the Sanhedrin, and it was recorded on the Talmud. Well, it was the Sanhedrin who were the faction that commissioned the Roman Empire who were the pagan Roman Empire at the time, to execute and crucify Jesus. So that tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it, about their agenda? Clubs in Japan have started banning people with Indian, Middle Eastern, and African passports, especially clubs owned by Japanese immigrants. Yeah, they have, yeah, and it's because they've been sexually harassing women. In fact, on my, I was working the city centre recently, and some woman came up to me. She showed me a picture of a black guy, and she said that guy was going around spiking women in bars, and also there was I actually saw this. There was an Indian, I think he was Indian anyway, and he was working at a cafe nearby, and he was standing outside. He was on his phone, and some other immigrant came up to him. I think it was one of them Roma gypsies, and just tried to steal his phone, like broad daylight. Just went up and tried to grab it, and I was like standing watching. It was crazy, man. But yeah, you see a lot of immigrants just do things brazenly without even any thought of the consequences. Yeah, Japanese are sick of forced immigration too. Fair play to the Japanese. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's about bloody time. I mean, the Japanese are, for the longest time, were a nation of dweebs, and I think it's gotten to the point they've started to man up and realize that they got to defend their lands and defend their traditions and their culture. Japan has got a beautiful culture. I've got family out, in Japan. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, a beautiful culture, and it's being destroyed by immigration, just like our culture. So hopefully we can all fight back. When I was at school, World War One was never really focused on. A lot of history was focused on World War Two and about Hitler, as well as the Cold War up until the 80s. Yeah. See, I don't think I even learnt about the Cold War in school. Again, it was mostly World War One and World War Two, but it was more so World War Two than World War One. The incel problem is not just getting laid. Some even get escorts and they still have same issues. I believe it's a social exclusion. Yeah, and again, a lot of that is autism. Let's be honest. A lot of that, like the ones who were like, the ones who came up with that term, who created their own like online subculture, they were definitely autists. Yeah, they were people like Chris Chan, those types that came up with that. But again, I don't even believe in the whole concept of an incel. I don't think that even exists. I think anybody can get laid unless you're like infertile or something, or you literally like you don't have reproductive organs. Then there's no such thing as an incel. Okay, no such thing. Yeah, World War One was particularly brutal, and the amount of like most of the effects of it was starvation and fatigue. Yeah, fatigue and starvation. That was most of the problem that the soldiers had to deal with. Christians in Syria have been killed by Muslims in the civil war. Yeah, I mean, Syria used to be a Christian nation, as did Lebanon, but they were subjugated violently, and now it's a Muslim country. It's been violently subjugated because that's what they do. Okay, I don't know why anybody expects anything different. Have you seen Tank freaking online? He's been calling his own fans dick suckers, bitches. I've not seen that. No, I don't pay attention to boxing social media, to be perfectly honest. After that, proceeded to slate he's retiring after Jake deleted his Twitter account. Yeah, I could care less. That guy should be in prison. I mean, he ran over a pregnant woman and then left in a hit and run. So he should be, he should be done away with, in my opinion. World War One was the least talked about war at school. The other wars like Vietnam took the spotlight for tests. We did learn about the trenches though, how people survived in them. Yeah. You learn about like no man's land. You learn about the trenches, but you don't learn a lot about the complex political situation of World War One. That's one thing that they never talk about in school, which is really sad. Destiny on that Piers Morgan debate had a lot of twitching, it seemed. His eyes were darting to every corner in the room. That's probably his medication that he's on. Or he's probably on numerous medication, that guy. I would expect. You're expected to do everything yourself now. These days, even when giving advice, look, see, when I was growing up, no one taught me anything. My parents always told me, I say parents, it was my mother and my stepdad. They told me you should go to university, you should do this, you should do that, but they never taught me how to do anything. They never taught me anything. So I'm like, I wasn't given any skills. I wasn't given any real encouragement. Anytime I wanted to do something, like I wanted to box, I wanted to do certain other things, they just poured cold water on the idea and acted like it was stupid. And that's all it was. I always remember that quote from comedian Oliver Hardy. There's nothing dumber than a dumb man who thinks he's smart. Yeah. But when you get a Reddit atheist who floods the comment sections of every video with copy pasta that he probably hasn't even read, it's like a quote from Richard Dawkins or something. Then you ask him a simple question, and he mentions the flying spaghetti monster, or he talks about if God real, why bad thing happen and stuff like that. And I'm the first thing I'm going to say to them, any one of those people, I'm going to say to them, have you read Mere Christianity? And if they haven't, I'm going to say, go and read it, come back and ask me the same question after you've read that book. Yeah, the students use ChatGPT to cheat on tests. They also, some of them used it to try to debate with Charlie Kirk, and they still got their asses kicked while using AI to try to debate, you know. Did you see that one where he was, I think it was Cambridge University, and there was that like liberal feminist English girl, and she was like talking to Charlie Kirk, but she was looking at her phone nearly the whole time, and she was talking so fast because she was reading an AI generated script, probably using Chat GPT. And then Charlie Kirk said to her, "Try answering me without looking at your phone." And then she started freaking out and saying, "I'm not looking at my phone," when she evidently was. That was funny. Go and check that out if you haven't seen it. Most politically ignorant people in Ireland are late 30s liberals born at the end of the Catholic Church's dominance over state and grew up before cultural Marxism, thinking the far right of the issue. Do you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of Scottish Catholic boomers who support the SNP because they want independence and up the English, when, you know, the SNP is literally a communist cultural Marxist party who prioritizes Muslim immigrants over the people of Scotland and can't even define what it means to be Scottish. Like you ask the average MSP MP, and they'll tell you. You ask them what do you mean Scottish? What does that mean? They'll say, oh, it just means a person, you know, who it just means a person who has come to Scotland and has got a Scottish. No, what is it they say? I've asked a few of them. This is what they say. They say something like, it means a person who lives here and who shares our values and who lives in our country. Oh, so you mean people from the Middle East who want to violently subjugate our people and behead our men and rape our women and force us to pay the jizya? Oh yes, those are our people. Those are Scottish. Yeah. Yeah, that's how you define a Scottish person, you know. And the teaching is trashy. Yeah, because the teachers are like TikTok influencers. That's another. See, TikTok has got to go. Like TikTok, again, speaking of communism, TikTok is literally an app owned by the Chinese Communist Party, being used to gather data and spread nothing but degeneracy into the children of the West. Like that whole app, when Trump said he wanted to ban it, I don't understand why he never went through with it. Like TikTok should have been banned years ago, you know. It should have been. Has the African bus weirdo been caught or more likely rehomed? Do you know, I've not heard anything about him since that day. I assume what's happened is the police have rehomed him and moved him to another community where he can go around grabbing kids and trying to lick them. I'm assuming that's probably what's happened there, you know. As far as I'm aware, I've not seen him since. But yeah, the neighborhood watch in my old neighborhood are looking out for him, you know. It's probably for his own good he moves away, you know. Japan hates everything foreign. Now, I don't blame him. That guy Evan Deere is a Satanist insect. Evan Deere, wait, I know that name. Who is that? Doesn't that guy comment on YouTube videos? Is that not a commenter? I just, the name rings a bell. I don't know who it is, but it rings a bell. Evan Deere. Social exclusion and basement dwellers are going up. Is that autism or something? Well, autism, it could be a symptom of autism, because autists struggle to socialize because they struggle to read social cues, and they have obsessions that they struggle to not think about, and they have intrusive thoughts. So that's one of them things where, like, let's say you're an autist, but you don't know, you're undiagnosed, and you're like absolutely obsessed with a particular cartoon or something. Like, let's say you're obsessed with the Teletubbies, or I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's say you're obsessed with like Thomas the Tank Engine, and everyone you hang around with, the only thing you can think to talk about is Thomas the Tank Engine. And they're like, why are you talking about Thomas the Tank Engine all the time? I don't care about that. And they try to tell you about football, or try to tell you talk about women and stuff like, and you're just not interested. All you care about is that one specific obsession. That's going to depress you. It's going to upset you, because you're not going to know when people are uncomfortable with you constantly going on about your obsession, or constantly trying to avoid the intrusive thoughts surrounding it, to the point where you can't have a conversation with somebody. So your parents do nothing about it. Your relatives do nothing about it. You end up sitting in your house, watching anime porn, getting, falling down the rabbit hole, becoming sick in the head, essentially. Like the guy who shot Charlie Kirk. That's what happened to that guy. He's just probably an autist, right? Just a a guy who was ostracized from society, is boomer liberal parents sent him to university because that's what you're supposed to do, right? If you want to be a good member of society, you got to go to college, right? So they send you to university, and he has his sociology, humanities teachers telling him, oh, race and sex are social constructs, and there's no such thing as gender, and conservative politicians are all far right extremists, you know. So again, the guy spends all his days inside jerking off to anime porn. Never met a woman in his life. Never had an honest conversation in his life. Full of intrusive thoughts, probably on medication. Goes absolutely insane and ends up shooting a guy. Like that's it. It doesn't surprise. Or goes to a school and shoots up a bunch of kids. Like it doesn't. It doesn't always have to be a conspiracy theory, guys. It could literally just be insanity. It can be mental illness untreated or treated the wrong way, if that makes sense, you know? So that's what I see with that issue. I think autism is a much bigger problem than people think it is, you know? It genuinely is. Satanist Evan Deere gave me his soul over at Discord, and I immediately gave his soul to Jesus. Kid you not? Oh, good on you, mate. Good on you. That's scary, man. Again, I don't know who that is, but I've the name rings a bell. It does, you know. Many of them older people are very emotional about their fighters, and when you discuss with them in boxing matter, they turn around and call you a fanboy. Yeah, I'm the fanboy, but I'm the guy you know who's literally not like obsessed with any particular fighter. I just talk about the sport, and they're the guys getting mad when I criticize a particular guy they like. You know. Sorry, this kid's shouting right outside the window. Sorry if you can hear that. It's like defining Bakoli as Scottish. He's from the Congo. Yeah, the guy's literally from the Congo. He's like an obvious, like blatant African. He's not Scottish, but they would call him Scottish just because he lives here. A teacher literally used ChatGPT to send me advice. Yeah, so it's not their advice really. It's the AI's advice basically that they're giving you. So you ain't getting anything authentic, you know. I saw Evan in boxing chats, if I recall. Yes, Evan Deere is a commentator who hangs out at BDA boxing disc. All right, well there we are then. And he's a satanic incel, you say. Well, I'll keep an eye out for him. I tell you that. That's kind of scary. I left Discord a few years ago, but I've seen Evan Deere's name around. I've never used Discord. Never used it. I've got a little cousin who uses Discord. He tells me about it. Apparently, there's a lot of trannies on there. Yeah, football is a normie sport, and again, most guys in their 50s in this country care more about football than they do about mass immigration, or you know the falling birth rates and things like that. You know, yeah, of course they do. Muslim birth rate is going down rapidly. Not in this country, it isn't. Not in this country, I tell you, it's going up. Like some of them are having 8 kids and all that. I have autism. I was obsessed with Dragon Ball Z and boxing politics growing up. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise. Like you can look autistic obsessions. A lot of people don't get this. It can be anything. And again, I have obsessive compulsive disorder. So I have like the certain rituals I feel like I have to do, or the world's going to end, and things like that. And it seems stupid to the average person, but to an autist, it seems perfectly logical because it's an intrusive thought. Autists get intrusive thoughts all the time, and they struggle to deal with them, and it obviously gets in the way of socializing, you know. And yeah, if you're so obsessed with one particular subject, you could fail at all other forms of human interaction. It's easily done, you know. It really is. Yeah, how's it going, Thomas? Good to see you here, man. God bless you. Nobody helps people with autism. All they get is shitty extra time, and that's it. Yeah, but they don't. I think the best way to deal with autism, and I found this personally, and I talked about this a little bit when I did that video. You know that video where I was talking about destiny. When I talk to autistic people, the way I deal with it is I talk to them the same way I would talk to anybody. I don't treat them any different. And even though it sometimes takes them a little bit longer to get their point across, and it sometimes takes them a little bit longer to compute what I'm saying in their minds, what I'll do is I'll just give them, again, like you say, extra time, but I mean that unironically. Is I take my time talking to them, and I kind of empathize with what they're saying, and see if they say something that doesn't make a lot of sense. Sometimes I'll ask them to reiterate what they said, or I'll ask them to clarify, and sometimes you can get a genuine conversation going with them. But don't the best way to deal with them, don't patronize them. Don't patronize autistic people because they hate that. It actually makes them angry when you do that. You know, when you treat them like kids, and that's when they start going into fits and getting angry. Just talk to them like you can banter with an autistic person, and sometimes I'll bring up, like, I'll ask them about their autism and the stuff they deal with, and I'll talk about like intrusive thoughts and stuff. I'll talk about obsessions, and I'll talk about, and I'll try and take an interest in their interest, and let them know, like again, I was talking to an autistic person not too long ago who was absolutely obsessed with video games, like this guy would tell you anything about them, and it was like his absolute world, and I'm obviously very very into video games myself, and what see when you take an interest in their interest, but you don't like, it's hard to really describe it, but you don't get overly enthusiastic about it, and get too technical. You just kind of give your own opinion and stuff like that. You can have just a normal conversation with an autist, and usually that's good for them. I think that's good for their mental health. Just long story short, treat them like a human being. Treat them like everyone else. Don't treat them differently. Don't treat them like an idiot. Don't patronize them. Don't insult them. Just talk to them. And again, you can even banter with them, and you can make fun of their autism lovingly, but you can do it in kind of a self-deprecating kind of way. You say, like, I'll say to them, "Listen, I know how you feel. I get these same twitches and stuff." And again, I'll hear a certain noise. I remember when I was a kid, because of my OCD, there was this certain noise that someone used to do that used to really annoy me, and I used to have to do this like weird ritual afterwards, where if I didn't do it, I would hear that noise in the back of my mind, and it would make me want to like punch somebody. I would like fly off into violent rages because of it. Again, that's an OCD trait, right? But see, when I talk to autistic people, I'll sometimes tell them about that, and I'll joke about it, and they find it really funny because they relate to it. You know, when you find something relatable, like when you hear a comedian joke about something, and you're like, "Oh, I get that. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying." I've had conversations like that with autistic people, where I'll bring up some of my obsessive compulsive tendencies that I've had to deal with over the years, and they're like, "Man, I get that. You know, I know exactly what you're saying." And it brings them out of their shell and stuff like that. I honestly think that's the best way to deal with autists. Again, empathize with them, find common ground with them, and treat them just like you would treat anybody. Like when I speak to my mates, even ones that aren't autistic, I banter with them, and I kind of, I don't treat them any differently. Things like that. You know, it's that's how you socialize with people. That's how you communicate with them. You know, and I think a lot of people in the generations below us, especially ones with mental illnesses, have lost or forgotten how to communicate basically like human beings, you know. um yeah, how's it going, Tom? Wait, I already read that, didn't I? I hate people who always discredit people as conspiracy theories when they go against what the media thinks. It's like they want you to be a robot instead of using your own brain. Yeah, I agree with that. Look, they expect you to just read the news and agree with everything you see automatically without doing your own research. That's what they want. They just want you to be ignorant. They want you to be a conformist. They don't want you to do your own due diligence and your own research. And that's why, you know, you won't see me promoting a conspiracy theory unless I've looked into it myself first, and not reacted to it too quickly. Like right now, again, one thing a lot of people are saying, or at least some of my audience anyway, some people are saying that about the Charlie Kirk situation. And I was going to talk about this in a video, but I think I'll just cover it here. The idea that Charlie Kirk is still alive, that the shooting wasn't real, that it was kind of a Hollywood stunt. You know, you guys have seen the comments; they're all over the place. I had one guy last week said to me that there was a movie, and I've seen a lot of people talk about this, but there was one guy in particular on my channel pointed out that there was a movie in the 90s where a guy got shot in the throat, and the actor who played him was Charlie Kirkland. Apparently, that was the guy's name, Charlie Kirkland, right? And he got shot in the throat in a movie. So that means that was his whole argument, right? That means that the Charlie Kirk shooting wasn't real. Now, to look at a scene from a movie from like 30 odd years ago, and to have that be your basis for why you believe the shooting wasn't real. I'm not saying that you can't believe that the shooting wasn't real, right? You're well within your rights to believe that, but to base that movie scene as your proof, your evidence that tells you that unambiguously, that absolutely it was a fake shooting and that Charlie isn't really dead. To go on that, you are the conspiracy theorist. You know, you are the conspiracy theorist of conspiracy theories. Like, if watching that, if knowing about that movie scene was enough to convince you of that particular conspiracy theory, you are the guy who walks into a room, and when you get the craziest conspiracy theories ever, you know, the guys that believe the dumbest stuff ever, you know, like the David Icke types, they see you and think, that guy, we don't know him. He's not one of us. He's crazy. That's what they would think of you walking into a room with that theory. Because an actor in a movie got shot in the throat and his name was Charlie Kirkland, that means, and look, I understand predictive programming. I understand predictive programming exists. I'm not denying that at all. But that's a bit of a stretch, don't you think? Even for someone like me, that's a bit of a stretch. So again, the idea that Charlie Kirk isn't really dead, that he's, I don't know, he's on an island somewhere with Elvis and Bigfoot or whatever, and he's still alive, that the shooting was fake. I mean, and look, a lot of people believe it. A lot of people do. And it seems to be people on the reactionary right who believe it. I'm really struggling with that one, guys. I mean, I'm really struggling with it. I am. And you guys will be surprised by who else it was who said that today. It was Precise said that to me on one of my community. He wasn't the one who brought up. He didn't bring up the movie scene. That was someone else. That was another subscriber. But yeah, what Precise said was essentially that he believes there was a squib on Charlie Kirk. You know, like those things they use in movie scenes when they fake gunshots. Like if someone gets shot in the chest, for example, they'll have a squib underneath their shirt, and that squib will go off essentially at the right moment, and there'll be like a fake blood splat, and it'll look like the person's been shot. That's how they do a practical shooting effect in Hollywood. Precise was claiming, and he said this on my. I didn't go looking for this. He said this to me on my community post, so I'm not like trying to start any shit here. He came on my community post and he said this, that he believes Charlie Kirk had a squib on, I can't remember if he said it was under his shirt or on his neck or whatever, but he said they used a squib in a Hollywood shooting effect, and that the whole thing was fake essentially, and it was used to create confusion, and it was used to create but basically whatever's happening in the aftermath, that it was all planned essentially, that it was a fake shooting, a false flag essentially. And I read that and I was just thinking to myself, look, you better have a badass film study to back that up, because if not, I think that's insane. I really do. Like, look, if it was something that happened behind closed doors, if we just saw a news report telling us, look, Charlie Kirk has been shot. We don't know what's happened, but he's believed to be dead, and there was no video footage. There was no witnesses, and it was all done like hush hush. It was like a more subtle assassination. Then I would be very suspicious. I'd be like, okay, well, how come there's no footage? How come there's no witnesses? Something's not right here. I'm going to need to see evidence of this. But to believe that in front of thousands of people, he was on a college campus in front of thousands of people in broad daylight. There were people streaming it online on their phones. There was cameras everywhere. There was people everywhere. Like there was so many witnesses. There was so many people in attendance, so many people watching online. I followed it as it happened, okay? I didn't just find out about it hours later. I followed it as it happened, okay? And you're telling me Charlie Kirk had a squib on his neck, and somebody, I don't know, fired a shot or fired a blank or whatever, and they faked his death for some sort of political gain, and he's actually still alive, living on an island somewhere. And or either that, or he's, again, I posed the theory that he might not be alive. Maybe they faked the shooting and then killed him somewhere else silently, which I guess they'd have to tie up loose ends, right? I can't get my head around that. I think that even to someone like me, that's insane. I watched the footage. I saw it myself. Right after it happened, I was shown amateur mobile phone footage of that shooting right after it happened, while he was still being rushed to the hospital, bleeding to death. You're telling me that was fake? I mean, look, Precise, I got nothing against you. You know that. I respect you very much. But come on. I mean, I await your evidence for that theory. I really do. Okay. That's all I'm going to say there. Yeah. It's a little bit much for me. Now, I'm as radicalized as you can possibly get, as far as the reactionary right can be. You guys know that, okay? I'm not the kind of person who... I'm very well aware that the mainstream media and the agent provocateurs and the... what's the word I'm looking for? The controlled opposition within the conservative movement has a lot to answer for, and there's a lot of things that they've done which are staged. And I understand, look, false flags are real. They happen. They're a thing. There's a reason for them. There's been many of them throughout history. Like, if you told me Abraham Lincoln's shooting never really happened and it was fake, I could believe it. There's no footage of it. There was no cameras, as far as I'm aware. No witnesses are alive today to tell the tale. I could believe it. I could well and truly believe that whole thing was a political stunt and that it was fake and that Abraham Lincoln wasn't really shot. Even if you were to tell me that about Kennedy, right? He was assassinated in public, kind of like Charlie Kirk was. Even if you were to tell me that was fake, look, that footage has been edited time and time again. It's a very, very historic moment in the history of America. Kennedy was a very controversial figure who had a lot of factions against him, but also his death had a big ripple effect. There was a lot of political... There was a lot to be gained from it politically, but Charlie Kirk, I mean, who was Charlie Kirk really? Yeah, he was popular. He was influential. He was very good at debating people. He was a great, like, intellectual conservative pundit or a conservative activist. But to fake his death and to have the president and the entire establishment in on it the way they would have to be, for me to see that footage minutes after it happened, to see that guy get shot in the chest, as soon as I saw it, do you know what I said? And I saw mobile phone footage of it. Do you know what I said? I said the second after I saw it, it was a sniper, a high-powered rifle. He's not going to survive. That's what Now, do you think I would have said that if it was a Hollywood stunt? Would I have said, he's dead, he's not going to survive that? Like, I mean, man, like, I just think it's a stretch. I really do. Man, yeah, I think it's a stretch. Crazy, in my opinion. And I don't say that lightly. And I don't think you're insane. I think you're an intelligent man. I really do. So if you've got reason to believe, and what he said to me in my community post, again, he didn't bring up the movie scene or anything like that. What he said was, it was logical. It was the logical conclusion given what we know. I could be paraphrasing here. I don't have the comment in front of me, but he said it was the logical conclusion to make was that it was a Hollywood stunt and that it wasn't real. I don't know how you work that one out, mate. I really don't. I don't know how you work that out. I've watched it. I've watched it myself. I don't see that. I just don't. Good point about boomers being addicts and alcoholics. Why should I take advice from an alcoholic who smokes and drinks and still works at the same factory for 30 plus years? Yeah, I got a guy who's in his 50s, has worked for 30 plus years, but can't afford to pay off his parking fines. He gets a bill for his car to get it fixed, and he can't afford it. Like, he doesn't have a spare $3,000 sitting in the bank. Like, but I'm supposed to see him as an intellectual and someone to look up to, like when he's an alcoholic and an addict and somebody who's very emotionally immature. Like, how can oh, man, it's pissing me off thinking about it. It really is. I went on to BDA Live after the Usyk versus Dubois fight, and no joke, a guy literally was screaming on the stream from a phone call, Canelo, constantly. Yeah. Mate, I said years ago, long before this became common knowledge, I said BDA was the Canelo fan, the official Canelo fan page. I said that long ago, and I stand by it. I'm just going for a pee. I'll be back in a sec. Okay, where was I? Nordic, are you excited for your digital ID card? I don't think that'll happen. Look, as far as I'm aware, that petition has got going on 3 million. It's got like 3 million people that have signed it, and Keir Starmer's getting ridiculed for it. I don't think that the United Kingdom is ready for communism just yet. I mean, they're getting there. Don't get me wrong, but they're not. They're not there just yet, in my opinion. If you had a Discord, there wouldn't be any wrong-uns. All right, do you mean like because I could control who comes in and out of the Discord? Is that what you mean? Because I think it's your own little community, isn't it? Maybe I'll have one day. Who knows? It's going down Nordic. No joke. Nick Griffin did a stream about it somewhere. Oh, did he now? Interesting. I might check that out. I like Nick Griffin. Nordic. It's funny how Canelo normies said that Kovalev and Callum Smith were scared to hit Canelo because of his counters. Yet Crawford, who's 3 weight classes smaller, was countering him easily. Well, look. I talked about this with Fight Scout in the comment section of one of his videos. I talked about how, do you know when you get manufactured frauds in boxing? The manufactured frauds, I feel like they push them a little bit too much to the point where what they do is unrealistic. Like, they ignore weight divisions, they ignore the laws of physics. Like what guys like Canelo and Crawford have done in their careers to get the incredible records that they've got really do defy the laws of physics. So it's a situation where, for me, you have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to rationalize Canelo knocking out Sergey Kovalev and then getting beaten up by Terence Crawford. Like, to rationalize that or to make it realistic, you have to pretend. You have to put your fingers in your ears and your head in the sand and just pretend that boxing is always real all the time, and that there's no such thing as a fixed fight. As if guys like Kawagi don't exist. But hey, why am I talking about boxing? When I walk through the halls at school, I always step over the lines. If I step on the lines, it will cause that dissatisfaction. Do you know, I had a very, very similar tendency once when I was a kid. Do you know if I, and again, this is OCD, autism, we're finding common ground, right? There was a thing where, see, if I walked on, do you know them like square tiles, I would have to walk in the middle of the tile. If I didn't, it was like something really bad was going to happen, and I have to turn the light off 3 times and shit like that. It's that kind of. I know it sounds really stupid, but when you're a kid with OCD, you genuinely feel like the world's going to end if you don't see through your rituals. Like there was a thing. See, my stepdad was a bully. I hated him, but like he used to really, really torment me with OCD because he would do certain noises that he knew got under my skin, and again caused me to fly into a violent rage. And he used to do that just to piss me off and annoy me. And I don't know if it's because OCD wasn't well known at the time, or if it was just flat out cruelty, but it used to cause me so much stress. I hated it. And again, there's certain things I had to do, otherwise I wouldn't be able to get the thought out of the back of my mind. I'd end up hurting myself because of it. It's not so bad nowadays because I understand it, I can deal with it, but back then it was a nightmare. It makes most of life unbearable. That's what OCD does. Not relating to others in high school made me very insular. It made a person who hardly talks to others. Yeah. Again, I don't think I'm autistic. So I didn't have a lot of the problems socially that a lot of people do, but I definitely had a lot of problems, with tendencies to overthink things and obsess over things. I argued with some normie girl yesterday, told her dancing Israel, Googled, and the first results were some Reddit thread saying it's fake. Yeah. Yeah, and she probably didn't look beyond that, I'd imagine. She just saw the Reddit thread, and her normie mind was like, "Oh, well, that's me told. That's me fully informed about the situation." Get this charger out. Many kids nowadays, especially the ones in primary schools or young or older and younger, are blatantly rude, annoying, and vulgar. They genuinely do crazy things and are blatantly rude to nearly everyone. Yeah, yeah. The kids are the generation now that are kids are absolutely vile. Like I remember I was not too long ago, just like a month ago or something. I was walking home and I seen there was like these 2 little boys and this little girl that they can't have been older than like 12, 13, something like that. And the boy was talking out loud in broad daylight, like loud at the top of his voice, talking about another boy, saying he sucked his dick and he like put his dick up his arse and all. And I'm like, he's telling these other girls about the sexual acts that he's performed with another boy. And I was right there walking past them, and they didn't care that I was there. They took no notice of me. They're saying it blatantly out loud, and I'm like, when I was a kid, if I spoke like that in the presence of an adult, I would have gotten slapped. Like if I said something like that in the presence of an adult, they'd have been like, "You dirty little shit," and they would have slapped me and told me to watch my mouth. And I'm like, the way kids talk nowadays, it's so vulgar, it's so disgusting, and that's just a TikTok generation. It's a generation that's been completely and utterly infantilized and radicalized. She proceeded to not believe the front page of Google said experts debunk this anti-Semitic theory. Who are these experts? It's interesting how they tell you experts say the planet is going to blow up in the next 2 years. Who are these experts? They never ask who they are or what their credentials are, do they? And they don't double check these credentials and double check the validity of what these quote unquote experts are saying, do they? I asked to see the evidence. It's true. She had nothing. Yeah, of course. Have you heard the controversy with Nick Fuentes? Because Nick said Israel didn't kill Charlie. Now everyone's accusing Nick of being compromised or fed because he doesn't believe Israel. Mate, literally, that's literally. I'm telling you, these guys are undercover Muslims. They have to be. So like all these groypers, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them are Muslim infiltrators, right? And Nick Fuentes, again, one of the most like staunch speakers of sorry, what am I trying to say? He's one of the most anti-Israel conservative pundits out there, right? He's very, very critical of Israel. You'll be hard pressed to find a semi-mainstream conservative influencer who's as critical as Israel as him. Just because he doesn't believe they killed Charlie Kirk, because it doesn't make sense to believe that. Let's be honest. They all turn on him and say he's an Israel shill. I mean, you got to be out of your mind to believe that guy is a Zio shill. And again, even calling Charlie Kirk a Zio shill doesn't make any sense, because he's never been openly in support of the state of Israel. He's always been moderate on the state of Israel, as he was on many things, you know. So that's just insane, man. It really is. I don't believe it was faked. However, I believe there's more than a tranny killer. I think he knew his time was coming. Well, again, the tranny killer could. I've suggested he was probably part of a cabal, because there was several decoys in the crowd, and there was a distinct lack of security. Now, I work security, right? So, and I always notice things. See, whenever I work at a new venue, I look at any potential like entrance points, any potential vantage points. I look at any chinks in the armor, any weaknesses in the defense. As a security guard, that's just what I think of naturally, right? But just due to the nature of my training and the job. So I find it very strange that Charlie Kirk's security team, I don't know who these people are, but I find it strange that they didn't have access to the roofs blocked off. Like for example, they could have had campus security check out any access to the roofs. They could have used a drone, as many people have said, to scan any potential vantage point. Or they could have just simply had one guy go up and inspect the roofs and the windows and make sure that, or an easier way of doing it, and this would have saved Charlie's life, like most likely, just put up a couple of banners to obscure, on each side of him. Obviously not the side of the crowd, but on each side of where Charlie was, put them up and obscure the vision of any potential shooter. That would have been easily done, and it would have saved his life. Okay, I mean, you could have done what they do in Russia and put up like bulletproof glass, but that might have been a bit excessive. Although obviously not given the circumstances. But in in retrospect, or like with looking at it without the benefit of hindsight, you could have just put up a couple of banners, like a couple of them Turning Point USA banners or whatever, or a couple of Make America Great Again banners or something, just to obscure the vision of any potential shooter. That's what I would have suggested if I was working security for Charlie Kirk's team. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how did his security team miss that? So I definitely think it was a blatant failing from a security perspective. Because again, if I was working there, that would have been the first thing I'd have. Even if I wasn't in charge, I wouldn't have needed to be like the head minder or anything. I might have just said, well, look, there's roofs here. There's a lot of people in the crowd. None of them have been searched, to my knowledge. So anybody could be carrying a pistol, or, anybody could have sneaked something in, like a bomb. You never know. So be very, very, they could have had stewards making sure that the crowd was a little bit more divided and a little bit more orderly. And all it would have taken is one drone or one guy to sweep the roofs, or campus security to block off the access points to the roofs, and it wouldn't have happened. So I definitely think it's a little bit convenient how that was allowed to happen, you know? Yeah, and I saw the footage minutes after it happened while people were freaking out online and people in the crowd were running around and screaming and panicking. I saw the footage. I saw him get shot from mobile phone footage. You telling me that was fake? I saw him answering a question. He got shot in the neck. I saw the trajectory of the shot where it landed. Okay. I saw the way he slumped down. Like if you've ever seen somebody like get knocked out, or you've ever seen somebody get shot, like it's not very dramatic. They slump down suddenly, and it's heartbreaking when you see it. It's terrifying. And I saw the crowd run. I saw like the bloody, what do you call it, the decoys in the crowd getting apprehended and things like that. It was a real shooting, in my opinion. It's going to take a lot of convincing to convince me that it wasn't. And look, no, again, no disrespect to Precise. I've got nothing against him. I think he's an intelligent man. I do. You guys know I've always had a lot of time for that dude. I don't know if he has any time for me. That's up to him. He probably thinks I'm an idiot, but for believing the shooting is real. He's entitled to his opinion. I would debate him on it any day of the week. I would debate anybody on it, right? But again, he's an intelligent man, but he seems to think that it's the only logical conclusion you could come to is that it's fake. That's what he seems to believe, which I find a little bit absurd, if truth be told. But given what I saw, I mean, I didn't imagine it. I saw a man get shot in the neck. I saw his funeral. I saw the Christian revival that's happening all over the world. I saw people dancing on his grave, celebrating it. I saw the immense fallout in the aftermath. I saw the organic response that it got all over the world. It doesn't seem like a false event to me. I've seen quite a few false events, and I've had my suspicions about them. But if it's a false event, they've done a heck of a job faking it. I mean, Charlie Kirk deserves an Oscar. If that was him pretending to get shot, that guy could have been a stuntman in Hollywood. He could have, if that's the case. Would have been the greatest stuntman ever, you know. So I'm wondering, is Precise? Does he actually believe that, or is he having some sort of? Has he gone schizo all of a sudden? I don't know. I don't know. You tell. If you're listening to this, Precise, let me know. Have you gone schizo, or are you being serious? And if you're being serious, then I look forward to you providing evidence, because I know that's what you do. You're very good at that, right? You slow down footage. You examine it in every single meticulous detail, and you'll argue that detail with anybody till the end. It's what I've always liked about you and your channel. So I look forward to it, and I keep an open mind. Charlie's wife, well, she didn't forget about him, did she? She talks about him every day, so that just ain't true, you know. Candace Owens said she thinks Charlie was shot from below, some sort of underground compartment. No, look, you can look again. This is just Candace Owens is doing my head in. She's definitely gone schizo with some of the stuff she's been saying. Look, the shot, the trajectory of the shot came from above. I saw that the second I saw it. This was before I was even told that it was a shooter on the roof. I saw from the amateur mobile phone footage, and I said this the second after I saw it. I said it's a sniper. He was shot with a high-powered rifle, and the trajectory of how the shot landed, it clearly came from the roof, or it clearly came from an elevated position. I actually said that on my live stream that I made shortly after it. So I think Candace Owen has lost her mind. I think she's gone completely schizo. I really do. I don't know what is going on with Precise. I don't know. I just think he's wrong on this. I think he's wrong. That's all I'll say. He probably thinks I'm an idiot. Again, he probably thinks I'm a complete dumbass for believing it. He's entitled to think that if he wants. I believe it was a real shooting. I believe it was some gay retard who was radicalized by the media, who may or may not have been part of some cabal. But do I think the whole thing was a Hollywood stunt and Charlie's alive living on an island somewhere? It's a stretch, in my opinion. I think it's a conspiracy for the sake of a conspiracy. I think people want to believe he's still alive, and they want to believe that the evil Jews have staged the whole thing. That's what I think is going on. I think people are just tripping. I think they're tripping over this. I think sometimes the simplest explanation is the true one. I know that's hard for people who like to complicate everything, but sometimes the simplest explanation is the truth. That's what sometimes happens. Sometimes if it walks like a duck, it's a duck. It doesn't always have to be a Jew. It can sometimes be a duck. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that, All right, where was I in the comments? I think a lot of people are on the everything is a conspiracy, which probably isn't far off, but this one was extreme. Yeah, it's very extreme. I saw the footage myself. It wasn't edited footage. It was a mobile phone footage minutes after the dude got shot while he was still on his way to the hospital. Okay, I saw it myself. Okay, come on, man. I'll check that out, Fight Scout. It's about a mentally disabled person who almost blew a big bill. Really? I'll check that out too, bro. Have you seen those people who think that Epstein never? Yeah, well, I actually spoke to somebody in person recently. Somebody, a fellow security guard who's heavily into conspiracy theorists, and it was actually a female, believe it or not. And she was saying that she believes her theory about what happened to Charlie Kirk is the reason they killed him is because he was constantly asking for the Trump administration to release the Epstein files, and he believes that. She believes that Jeffrey Epstein is still alive, and that he might have had something to do with Charlie Kirk's shooting. Now, I don't believe that personally. I think Jeffrey Epstein was just assassinated in prison. I think that's what happened. But she believes he's still alive and that he still has a lot of political power, and he doesn't want people, or the people working with him don't want to be implemented in what happened to him, or in being affiliated with him, And that Charlie Kirk, because Charlie Kirk did mention several times, he said anybody who's on that Epstein flight list should go to federal prison. He openly said that. So perhaps he was quite close to convincing people of that, The story was scrubbed from the internet because he wasn't successful in his endeavor. Which story was that? Did I miss something there? Sorry. Kelly Pavlik and Paul Williams. I'd probably pick Kelly Pavlik by knockout. I think Paul Williams would outwork him and maybe win a few rounds, but eventually Pavlik, too big, too powerful, he'd knock him out. I think probably late. Paul Williams because of beating Canelo. Yeah, Williams too big for Canelo. And yeah, he did beat Margarito in his prime. He just out muscled him. Paul Williams was just one of these big sluggers. He wasn't that skilled, but he was so strong and so tough, and he would just stand toe to toe and just throw a lot of punches and outwork and outland you, Later, guys. Yeah, later, Fight Scout. God bless you, man. I look forward to seeing that video. I just want to point out something from earlier. We were discussing creepy young people. That Adam Lanza in his house was very sinister. Looking back at it, just didn't look right. Isn't he the guy from the Sandy Hook shooting? Is that the guy I'm thinking of? I think he was autistic as well, wasn't he? He certainly looked like one anyway from his picture, Conspiracies are sounding like conspirators these days. Yeah, they are, I don't know how you can come to that conclusion that shooting was fake. That's just me. I'm open to the idea, but as of now, I think it's a schizo rambling. I really do. Do you know I haven't heard of Dancing Israelis? I keep seeing the comment on my stream, but I've not heard of it, so I don't even know what that is. Yeah, Jew wearing a duck mask. Yeah. See if a duck quacked and somebody heard it. One of these literal conspirators would see it and think it was a Jew in disguise. That's what I think of anyway. I think the people saying it was fake is because it was so sudden, because he was in the media often. It seems so shocking how he's gone. Yeah, maybe they're just in denial. Maybe they just want to believe he's still alive. Or maybe they didn't agree with Charlie, so they don't like the idea of him being a martyr, I'm open to the idea of, examining the psychology of these types, What would Epstein get out of dealing with? Yeah, I'm not saying I agree with that theory. That was what she told me. She said that because Charlie was calling for the Epstein files to be released and saying that anyone implemented in them would go to or should go to federal prison, she was implying that it was Epstein or people associated with Epstein that were behind his murder. I don't believe that personally. I literally just think it was some trans cabal. I think it's simple, Riddick Bowe from Holyfield 1 in the late 90s, early 2000 Lewis. Do you know, I think Riddick Bowe had a good style to beat Lewis in the pros, but I don't think he was consistent enough. I don't think he was a good enough athlete. I think Lewis would have worked harder and he would have probably persisted and probably won on points. I'd probably go with Lewis on points, I think. Stylistically, it would have been a hard fight, but I do think Lewis would have won it. Do you think they'll assassinate Andrew Tate since he's trying to wake people up from the Matrix? The Matrix is sending its people after me. Well, no, the Matrix is sending these agents after me. I thought it was funny. See, when they found the guy who shot Charlie Kirk and Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate's a clown, by the way. But I did think it was funny how he was talking about what we should do is we should carve Charlie's name into that guy's chest, into that man's chest, and then he's like, and then shoot him in the neck. And if no one else wants to get their hands dirty, I will take the shot myself. Andrew Tate, again, he's a nutcase, and I think he's an idiot, but he is funny. Andrew Tate, I can see why people like him because he is entertaining. And scrolling through his Twitter, he makes all these crazy ass serial killer posts, and a lot of the stuff he says is ironic, and it is kind of funny. I do find Andrew Tate funny. And entertaining. He's kind of like Alex Jones in that sense, Hey, how's it going, Pierce? God bless you, man. Good to see you again. To say as well, I think Bo would have knocked out Lewis if they fought after the Holyfield bout. Lewis had many holes that Bruno was taking advantage of, and McCall knocked him. Yeah, he did. Yeah, I think McCall was a situation where though he was so tough and so durable that he was able to walk his way into position and land the perfect shot. I don't think Bo had as good a chin or as much heart, to be honest, as McCall. I don't think he would have got the job done. Here's a question: do you ever watch a cartoon called Mike Murdoch? No, I've never heard of it. Why? What's it about? They refused to release the files. Kirk saying to release them would do nothing. Yeah. I don't think Kirk had that much political power or clout. He was just an activist. That's all he was. But he was very influential with young people, and that's probably why the tranny mob, which is what again they wanted to assassinate J.K. Rowling. They wanted to assassinate what's his name, Notch, the guy who made Minecraft. Like if they were going to assassinate them, people who aren't that politically influential at all. Of course, they want to assassinate someone like Charlie Kirk, who's debating with young college kids on campuses and winning them over to the right, essentially. Again, that's why I was saying near the start of the stream, guys in the reactionary right, like you and I, we can criticize Charlie Kirk all we want, but let's be honest, we will never be as influential as he was. We will never do as much for the conservative cause as he did. So I'm going to take inspiration from Charlie Kirk. I'm not going to criticize him that much at all, to be honest. Look, he's a young guy, 31 years old, a born-again Christian. So many people became Christians because of him. So many people became conservatives because of him. I can't say the same, and neither can you. So let's give the guy credit where credit's due. And even in his death, he continues to inspire so many people to take part in this new Christian revival. It's an act of God. He's genuinely a Christian martyr, and God works in mysterious ways, but I genuinely believe he uses these tragedies for good. The tranny will probably like that. He looks like he's into masochism. Oh yeah, the guy's definitely a creep. He's definitely a psycho who's into all sorts of. I mean, the guy was into anime porn, so I think that guy was just a nutcase. I think he was a useful idiot who was radicalized by the left. And look, all it takes is a little bit of bottle to climb onto a roof with a high-powered rifle and shoot a man. Look, Charlie Kirk is human. Okay, it doesn't need to be the Jews. It doesn't need to be, Nick Fuentes. It doesn't need to be Jeffrey Epstein. It doesn't need to be some secret organization. It doesn't need to be the Illuminati. It could just be one random guy with a gun. Sometimes that's all it takes. Okay, I could, if I wanted to, I could go and assassinate a British politician. Don't anybody put words in my mouth. I'm not saying I'm going to do that, but if I wanted to, I could. Okay, it wouldn't be that difficult. I could assassinate my local MP, or I could assassinate a local political activist. I could do that. It's easy. Okay, but if I did that, I guarantee you there'd be conspirators saying that it was the Jews that did it, or it was Jeffrey Epstein that did it. It's like, it doesn't always need to be an inside job. It doesn't always need to be a conspiracy. Sometimes, like I said earlier, if it walks like a duck, sometimes it is a duck. It probably most of the time is a duck. But a lot of people, and I don't know if I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouths. I don't know if Precise is like this. I don't know if that's secure. Sorry, bloody microphone. I don't know if any of the people, any of the on the reactionary right who are saying all these things are like this, but I feel as if they need there to be a conspiracy. Otherwise, they just don't know how to make sense out of life. That's what it's like to me. That's what it seems like. Maybe I'm guilty of that too. I don't know, but I don't want to be. The other thing from last time is in process as we speak. Should know more in 2 or 3 weeks. Oh yeah, brilliant, mate. Yeah, glad to hear it. Even though both are wrong uns and shows Andrew is funny and his bro is boring. Tate even scapegoated Jews for his crime. Well, he did convert to Islam, didn't he? So I mean, is there any surprise there? But I think he converted to Islam just so he could justify how he treats women. I honestly think he did. I thought the leftard celebrating Kirk's death demonstrably demonstrated exactly who the nasty side is in politics. Yeah, and you're not the only person to notice. Even a lot of people who were previously leftists are turning over to our side. They're turning over to the right because they've seen the face of the devil. They've seen these evil communist reprobates celebrating the death of a godly man, and they've heard the call. They felt the call of God that we all felt one time, and that they've been put on the path to becoming born again and repentant. I truly believe that's what's happened. Have you seen Tim Witherspoon versus Frank Bruno? Yeah, I have seen that. That was a thrilling 11-round war. Bruno's chin might have taken a lot of shots before he capitulated, to be fair to him. Yeah, he was so exhausted as well. You see Bruno at the end of that fight, how exhausted he was. It's crazy, wasn't it? Bruno had some crazy fights. Like, he was too heavily muscular to get through a hard fight, without like gassing, people will blame the Muslims for sure. Yeah, there's a myth that Bruno had a glass jaw. Real problem was complete lack of survival instinct when he got hit. Yeah, and a lack of stamina too. Again, he gassed out far too quickly, This generation, these kids that are 20 years old need to start getting laid and chasing girls and forgetting about politics. I disagree. I don't think they should be getting laid. I think they should find one good woman and they should settle down and get married. That's what I think. And have kids. Have a bunch of kids, I didn't get into politics till my 40s. Before that, I was chasing girls. Yeah. I don't think Andrew is a true Muslim. He's just been doing haram things. I think he's did it to expand his audience. Yeah, I think it's mostly, again, to justify his behavior towards women. That's what I think anyway. The story of the dancing Israelis would be that FBI agent found some Israelis agent in New York on the day of 9/11 engaging on some sus behavior. Do you know what? I've not even heard of that. I'll look into it, but I've not heard of it, so I'm not going to comment on it till I know more. Love the show, brother. Keep up the good work. Keep punching it and lifting weights. Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. God bless you, bro. There's a video of the dancing Israelis which proves they had more knowledge of the attack before it happened. Yeah, I'll look it up. I don't know anything about it, but I'll look it up. I don't think Bruno had a glass jaw. He took punches from Lennox without going down. Yeah, he did. And it was like the perfect shot that took him out as well. He actually did quite well in that fight. Yeah, he was. Yeah, true. He gave Tyson a few problems and all. Nearly stopped him at one point, I think. I got into a political debate at the age of 12, man. When I was the age of 12, I knew nothing about anything. I was like a dumb kid. So that's quite impressive, I must admit. That's impressive. Oh, hang on. I'm just reading my phone. I got a text. No, thank you. I just got a text offering me a construction job. I'm like, no, thanks. Some agency I signed up with to get jobs and all that, but like, no. All right. No point chasing women for Gen Z. The fact is nowadays young women have become incredibly picky. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of them have. I'd rather chase girls than use weapons. Have fun in your youth. Goes fast. Frank Bruno punch resistance may actually have been hindered after the Witherspoon bout due to how tired he was and the brutal finish then. Punch resistance, it always goes away when you're tired because you can't like tense up for shots and recover from them quickly and things like that. Your legs are not as stable. It just becomes a lot more difficult, It was, yeah, but he had a lot of flaws. No, Bruno just took a picture with Jimmy Savile. I don't think they were particularly close. I don't think they had anything going on really. I think they just took a picture together because they were both popular at the time, in the British media. Who do you think has the best chance of beating Usyk right now? Right now at heavyweight, I think a guy like, I know this will sound crazy, but one of the guys who is more of a tough guy, I think. So not someone who would try to box him. So like Parker is the guy who I think has earned the shot over anybody, but I don't think he has the best chance of beating him. Like, ironically, I would give Fabio Wardley maybe an even better chance of beating him than Parker because Fabio Wardley wouldn't go in there trying to box. He would go in there trying to slug and land a lucky shot. You know, he's a big odd man who would go for the knockout. So I'd give him a better chance. A guy like Caballero might be like tough and like gritty enough to break him down potentially, but I don't see it. Like I wouldn't favor anybody to beat Usyk, but I do think the guys who are tougher and big punchers, guys like Caballero and even Zhang, you know, he has that one punch power, doesn't he? And you know, even a guy like Bakoli, you know, size, power, just somebody who would know not to try to box Usyk, someone who would go in there, try to capitalize on his size and his age and try to knock him out. They would have the best chance against him, but and Wardley would probably have the best out of all of them. But I think any of the guys right now, I'd favor Usyk over. And someone like Parker, again, he deserves the shot, but he would try to box Usyk, and it wouldn't work out for him. I think he would just get outclassed, you know. That's what I think would happen. What's your favorite exercise to do at the gym? Mine's deadlifts. For me, it's probably the overhead press. Probably just because it's so hard to do, but it's not too hard to recover from. I've not been lifting weights over the past month because my gym membership ran out and I haven't renewed it. So I've just been boxing, but I'm gonna look into getting a new gym, one that's because that one that I was at before was near my old work. I don't work there anymore. I work all over the country now, so I'm better off getting a more like loose gym membership, one I can use different places or one that I can use near where I live. So, but yeah, my favorite lift is probably the overhead press. I'm kind of fascinated by it, you know. Big George Foreman versus Oliver McCall in the 90s. McCall might have had a better chin, but Foreman was the better boxer. Probably Foreman on points, I think. Which version of Foreman could have had the best chance in this current era against the likes of AJ, Dubois, Fury, Usyk, Joyce, Zhang, young, old George? Well, young George would have been fitter, closer to his prime, faster, probably tougher. But older Foreman had better punching technique, so he probably hit harder. He had much better technical ability. Like he refined his skills a lot more, much better jab, much better defense, great patience, a great nose for how to break his opponent's guard and land a punch. Great at pacing himself. Very good IQ in general, just an intelligent guy. Great on the back foot, you know, could use his reach. So I think older Foreman probably would have had a better chance. I think there's more to his game at that age, you know. Mine is flexing my bicep to the left wing, yeah, getting a little like 10-pound dumbbell and like posing in front of the mirror. I'm sneezing. Hope I'm not coming down with a cold. My nose is a bit puffed up as well. Did I show you guys? I've got a scratch on my nose. It's from sparring. I was sparring yesterday. I was sparring this Asian guy yesterday. I had him on the ropes. I landed a big overhand right, and I thought I had him. But then he spun off the ropes, and he caught me with a counter left hook, like a check hook. It skinned my nose, I think. So, yeah, I've got a scrape on my nose. It feels a little bit, like, swollen, you know. I got, like, a Carl Froch nose now, I guess. Reckon Wardley chins Parker. Obviously, Parker, who's favourite. Wardley's got a puncher's chance, for sure. Definitely give him a puncher's chance. Foreman that beat Ken Norton probably beat anyone. I disagree. I don't think he'd come close to beating Usyk. Dubois versus Galata, that would be like who can low blow the best. That's what that would be. Who's the best low blower? Who's the best cheater? That'll be it. I got some good sparring lately. I need to run more though. I just jump rope and then run. Well, see, I'm out of condition right now because I've not been training as much as I should be. I did 3 rounds yesterday and I was knackered. Like ordinarily, I can spar 12 rounds without getting tired. Yesterday, I was tired after 3 rounds, and I was not particularly happy about it either. Like the guy I was sparring was kind of a novice as well. He'd only been boxing for like 9 months. So you'd think I would have had an easy time, but my stamina was just way off and my timing, you know. Annoyingly, the Americans are calling Crawford Panther number 1, Usyk 1, Nui number 2. Usyk and Nui are well above Crawford, objectively, in my opinion. I don't think there's any question about that, you know. My first sparring, my coach out me against a more experienced amateur who beat me down, made me scared to spar. I'm getting back. Yeah, that happens in boxing gyms. That happens, you know. Yeah, you go in with someone more experienced, it's very discouraging. But if you're like me and you're a bit of a psycho, you go back for more. I actually had a fight the week before last at work. Did I mention earlier? So some scumbag drug dealer tried to attack me. Basically, like this young lad came to the pub I was working at, and he says to me, he said somebody was after him, one of the locals, and he gave me a description of the guy, and he offered me a fiver. He said, like, see if that guy shows up, don't let him near me. And I said to him, I was like, mate, you don't need to pay me. I was like, if you're on this premises, I'll watch out for you. You don't need to pay me. So he was like, all right, thanks. And he went in. And then this guy came to the door, and I wouldn't have let him in anyway because it was nearly closing time. It was after 1:00, and he was like this tall, like skinny guy with a black puffer coat, obvious drug dealer type, right? I found out later what it was all about was that lad bought cocaine off him, but didn't agree to pay because what it was basically, he sold him cocaine, he gave him it, and then he gave him the price. And the lad said basically it's a lot more than he'd initially agreed to pay, so he wasn't paying it, right? So this guy was after him, and he shows up to the door, and I said to him, like, sorry, mate, we're closing. And he's like, all right, but is there anyone in there? And I was like, yeah, there's a few people, but they're just about to leave. And he's like, oh, I need to go in, get my mate. And I knew what he was up to. And I'm like, sorry, mate, can't let you in. Like, it's the bar staff. Don't want anybody else in. We're about to close. You won't be served, so there's no point. And then he's like, he starts like getting annoyed at me, getting all wound. He's like, look, mate, he's like, you're costing me money here. That's what he said to me. And I was like, mate, look, you just wait 5 minutes, your mate will come out. All right. And then he's like, what was it he said? He said something like, do you know how this feels? He was like getting really, really angry. He was shaking. Like he had his hand on the door and everything. And he was like slowly putting his face close to my face as if he was trying to intimidate me because he was a lot taller than me. Right. And then he was like, I'm like, could you back up a bit, please, buddy? And he's like, what? You know the way people do, what? Like they get angry as if you've insulted them. And I'm like, mate, you're in my personal space. Can you back up a bit? So I put my arm out in front of him, and then he's like, I'll flip it, I'll effing knock you out. That was what he said to me. Like he was just like seething with rage at that point. I was like, is that right? Yeah. I said to him, I was like, yeah, well, that's fine by me because then you'll go to jail for assault. And he's like, oh, you're an effing grass. Is that right? You're an effing grass. And he says to me, what's your badge number? And I had my badge in my pocket, but like I didn't tell him my number. I was like, oh, I'm not telling you. And he's like, oh, well, I'll report you. I said to him, I was like, oh, so you're a grass then? Because he accused me of being a grass, right? So then I turned it back on him because he said he was going to report me. I was like, oh, well, so you're a grass then? And that pissed him off. And then he was like, he started like banging his hand against the wall. And he's like, get the F out my way. I was like, mate, listen, buddy, you're not coming in. Just calm down. So this guy charged right at me. I'll show you what he did, right? He goes, like, he puts his face right here in my face and shoves me against the door. Like he puts his hands on my chest like that and shoves me hard against the door. And I'm like that, right? My back went against the door, like hit against it really hard. And I went, all right, buddy, back off. And he went to do it again. And I went like this, right? I grabbed his biceps as he was trying to push me. And then I'm quite heavy, right? So even though he was a lot taller than me, he was thin and he wasn't that strong, right? So I just leaned all my weight forward and like walked him back. And he lost his balance and tripped on the curb. And I just threw him to the concrete. And then like after he was on the floor, he got up and he was jumping up and down like a monkey. And he's going, I'll fucking smash you, blah, blah, blah. But like he's moving backward. Like he's moving backwards while he's telling me, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You're a dead man. I'm going to smash your face in, this, that, and the other. And he's like, again, he's like, he might as well have said, you're lucky I'm not over there. Because if I was over there and not over here, I'd do you some serious harm. So I'm like standing there. I just went back to my post and I'm like smiling and like thinking, I love this job. And then he starts telling me, he's like, when you finish your shift tonight, I'm going to get you. You're a dead man. And then a few minutes of just like, he was like jumping up and down like a monkey. He took his jacket off and everything, like saying, let's go, let's go. A few minutes later, he calmed down and he just left. And then I finished my shift and went home. Oh, it was funny, man. And then the lad inside, because he was like terrified to leave because he thought he was still outside waiting for him. And I said to the lad, I was like right before I went home, I was like, listen, do you want me to call you a taxi? And I was like, when the taxi comes and then you go, then I'll leave. So I stayed a little bit longer on my shift just so that that lad could get a taxi and go home. And before he went, I said to him, I was like, listen, he was only a young guy. I was like, listen, mate, you should stop taking that stuff. You know, get off the drugs. It'll ruin your life, and you won't have. And if you do, you won't have to deal with dickheads like that. And he's like, yeah, I know. Whether he listens to the advice or not is not up to me, you know. But yeah, that was what happened. That was quite. It was quite funny. Yeah, that was a fight I had recently. Well, I call it a fight. The guy slammed me against the door and then ended up on his arse, and that was like I think at that point he realised he's got no backup, and he couldn't really like overpower me. So yeah, he took to jumping up and down like a monkey and making threats. You know, that was what he did. So that's my little bouncer story for the stream, I guess. Hot pick. I think that Vitali could have been the better brother of the K-Bros, not as hard hitting, but physically tougher and more consistent. Left hook is underrated as well. Yeah, he had kind of it was kind of like a little like light looking left hook. It was kind of slappy, but it did lasting damage. You know, kind of like when Baturbiev would land one of them chopping shots. And even though it doesn't look like it's got a lot on it, a lot of momentum, it stays with you. Like the opponents don't recover from it for like 5 minutes or something. It seems like that, you know. That's what it was like. Um, what's next for Usyk? Well, the only two guys anyone seems interested in seeing him fight are Caballel and Parker. I feel like I've been saying that for months now. You know, that's what it's like. I see Reform have been collecting Tories again. They're filling a trolley with Tory has-beens, Tory Party 2.0. That's what they always were. They were just, you know, the slightly more right version of the Tories, and to bring people back to the Tories. That's what Nigel Farage and his upstart factions do. You know. Yeah, my nose ain't as puffed up as Fury's. That's true. Yeah. You think running is the hardest part of boxing training? I've ran last 3 days feeling that. Yeah, I hate running. I hate it. I'd do it if I need to, but I don't like doing it. I don't like doing it, you know. I refuse to buy his poison. Yeah, yeah. I stopped him from like extorting a young man and beating the crap out of him and taking more than he's owed for his poison. But like he says to me, he's like, "You're costing me money," as if I'm like doing him a disservice. Like he's not entitled to enter the venue. The venue was closing, and they weren't serving anybody. So if he goes in, he's trespassing. So he's telling me he's going to report me. I'm like, report me for what? Like I didn't even do nothing, you know. What a bell end. But yeah, he ended up on his arse anyway. So, like, I was actually really surprised he didn't punch me. I thought he was going to punch me. I think he would have if I didn't like grab a hold of him and throw him down because like he slammed me against the door really hard. Like he really went for me. He was raging. It was like demon possession. But he didn't throw any punches. Lucky for him, he didn't throw any punches. I'll tell you that. You know. I think maybe next time he'll be armed or he'll have backup or something. Yeah, Nordic grabbing people's biceps like Purple Aki. Yeah. Well, that actually worked though, because again, like he put his hands in the position where he was going to push me. He was going to put his hands on my chest and slam me against the door again. But I intercepted it by grabbing his arms and walking him back. And yeah, he ended up losing his footing and pushed him to the floor, you know. And he was very embarrassed by that, you know. Yeah, how's it going, bro? God bless you. Yeah, British piss heads are funny, but Scottish ones are even worse. You know, it was a Scottish one. That's what happens, you know. Yeah, yeah, it's pathetic. It's pathetic. Normie like reprobate piss heads and drug dealers. I have a particular dislike for because they ruin people's lives and they ruin communities. And they make my job a lot harder because when people get coked up in clubs, they end up with acute behavioral disorder, which makes them very difficult to deal with. You know, I hate running so much, but usually when I spar, my opponent has stamina. My stamina could be worse. Yeah, running does help to build your stamina, but it doesn't necessarily condition you for boxing. Boxing is a lot more specific with its conditioning adaptation. Vitali landed the perfect left hook and Danny Williams in the third round that knocked him down. The final knockout was good as well. Uppercut lifted the head up so he could land flush. Yeah, his setup punches were good. That's another thing Lomachenko is really good at in his prime. You know, those setup punches. Like, look at the clinical knockout against Rocky Martinez, for example. Already started insane. People score fights differently. Mate scored Fury, Usyk a draw. To a draw. It said he won round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. Mate, Fury didn't win one round in that fight. I don't see how anybody can say otherwise. I really don't. Charlie Kirk statue George Floyd. Do you know what they should do? They should have a Charlie Kirk statue on every single college campus in America. And instead of a George Floyd statue, they should have, do you know those whack-a-mole games? You know, like the little mole comes out and you hit it with the hammer. They should have a whack a George Floyd. That's what they should have. So the little George Floyd heads come out and say, I can't breathe. And then you smack it. And then it's like, after you've hit it like 25 times, it's like, he died of a fentanyl overdose. That's what should happen. Whack a George Floyd. And you have a Charlie Kirk statue, every single college campus. Anybody who vandalizes it gets life in prison. That'll be awesome. Because I'm a fascist, you know, and that's a good thing. Nordic, have you ever considered moving to America or a European country if things get worse? I'm definitely leaving in the next 5 years. I have thought about moving to America. Like, I'll need to save up a lot of money. I would love to live in a red state in America, somewhere like Texas or Florida, and just have a whole bunch of guns and that. That'd be bad. That'd be badass. That'd be awesome. You know. Derek Chauvin should get a statue. He should be honored as an American hero. He rid the world of George Floyd. You know, yeah, that guy's all right. I like him. Got a lot of time for him. Wrongfully sent to prison. Chris Arreola recently said Andy Ruiz hit harder than Wilder. He said Klitschko hit the hardest. Well, I mean, he ended up crying and quitting on his stool when he fought Klitschko. So I can't really disagree with him there. You know, I worry for Fury. Could go down the same path, despite him being a dick nowadays. I hope so. I hope so. God bless him. Do you see the George Floyd mural being struck down by lightning? People saying it's a work of God. Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, imagine worshipping George Floyd. I mean, of all the people to worship. Or yeah, the way of Ricky Hatton. I know what you mean. Look, Ricky Hatton was extremely troubled. You know, drug addict, raging alcoholic. It was never going to end well with Ricky Hatton. You could just tell it was never going to end well. God bless him. God bless him. You know, but on a side, sorry, what am I saying? On that note, I'm gonna call it a day here. Gonna wrap this one up. Got some stuff to do, and yeah, thanks for stopping by, guys. It's been an interesting one. It's been more of a positive stream than I was expecting. I was expecting to get a bunch of dickheads in the comments calling me a Zio shill and all that. Thankfully, that never happened. But yeah, God bless each and every one of you. Stay vigilant.